Good afternoon. This May 17th, 2022 meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck.
Here.
Councilors Winland.
Here.
Wynn.
Here.
Verdick.
Here.
Raff.
Here.
Mans.
Here.
And Imbu.
Yeah. Now, everyone, will you please stand, remove your hats, and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Everybody was completely happy.
Oh, 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 yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Oh, so, almost. Oh, take a break. We're almost there. We're gonna take just a brief recess so you all can converse and make noise, and then we'll come back in order when it's all ready. So, don't go too far. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your patience. We are back in order, and we appreciate you waiting through. Of course, whenever something like that happens, which it never does, it's going to be on a day like this when all of you are waiting here so patiently. So tonight we have the honor of bestowing 2 types of special awards on 9 members of the Lake Oswego Fire Department as a way of recognizing these members of our city team and our community for extraordinary work. We're further honored to be joined by the honorees, their families, their fellow LOFD members, and the family of the saved victim. To commence the process, we're going to show a video capturing the incident for which they're being recognized. Thus, we'll start that video now.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
555 Country Club Road. I have a fire. A tree fell on my house. The house is on fire.
Okay, and you said a car ran into it?
Yes.
On the night of October 21st, 2021, Lake Oswego resident Erica Buchanan was driving her car down Country Club Road when she experienced a medical emergency. Her foot pushed down on the gas pedal, which led to the car going upwards of 111 miles per hour, going airborne and landing on the roof of the house at 555 Country Club Road.
We got heavy fire showing on the Alpha Delta corner. Just report to be issuing fire attack. Possible rescue, stand by.
Firefighters from Lake Oswego and Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue immediately responded after being notified by the Lake Oswego 911 Dispatch Center. As crews were starting to get the flames under control, it was apparent the home's exterior walls were compromised, and part of the roof had also collapsed on the car. With trusses and debris dangling above their heads, Lake Oswego Lieutenant Ryan Rudge and firefighter Stephen Kaw entered the house in search of victims. The smoke was thick, but they were able to climb on top of the car. That's where they noticed Erica Buchanan, still inside the car, burned and critically injured. With little time and the house now on the brink of collapse, crews knew they had to act fast and with precision to get Buchanan out of the car and limit her injuries. Driver-engineer Zachary Bell and firefighter Keith Youngblood joined the other rescuers. They entered the house from another direction through a broken window. Instead of a typical extrication, which would have involved cutting the car, they pulled Erica to her feet and passed her through the broken front windshield. Driver-engineer Zachary Bell then gave her a bear hug and fell backwards through a house window and into the waiting arms of firefighters outside. Paramedics from American Medical Response, together with firefighters from Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, quickly transported Erica to a nearby specialty hospital in critical condition, but ultimately saving her life. Erica was released from the hospital several months later and is still recovering from her injuries. She continues to improve, but has a long road to recovery ahead of her. For the selfless and heroic actions of the firefighters saving Erica's life, the City of Lake Oswego is honored to award the Medal of Valor to Lieutenant Ryan Rudge, driver-engineer Zachary Bell, firefighters Stephen Kaw and Keith Youngblood. In addition, the unit citation is being awarded to Lieutenant Ken Green, driver-engineer Nathan Weichel, driver-engineer Luke Fortune, and firefighter Brandon Castellum-Plata.
At this time, I'd like to ask the award recipients to please join me up front. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to pass you the microphone. If you could please introduce yourself to us and let us know how long you've been with the department, and then just pass down. Thank you so much.
My name's Stephen Kaw. I am a firefighter, soon to be paramedic, coming up on 2 years here at the fire department.
Zachary Bell, driver engineer, been here 6 years.
Ryan Rudge, lieutenant here. I've been here at Lake Oswego Fire for 16 years.
Firefighter Keith Youngblood, been here for
about almost 4 years.
Firefighter Brandon Gastelum Plata, been here for about 2 years.
Driver engineer Nathan Weichel, been here 6 years.
Thank you. So we all know that each one of you never knows what you're going to walk into any given day, but that you're going to do whatever it takes, no matter what you come across each day. And for that immense training, fortitude, and selfless service that requires, the city is immensely grateful. Family members still have loved ones with them because of the work you all do. And while that realization is undoubtedly a word enough, we are honored tonight to make the important recognition of the above and beyond actions that you all took in this event. Now, we don't, the victim, Erica Buchanan, she is unable to be with us here tonight, but we're very fortunate to have her mother, Olga Klauser, here, and she has a statement that she's going to read. So, Ms. Klauser, please.
Young men, this is dedicated to the firefighters and their unit that saved my girl's life. To you, I simply say, because of you. Let me start by giving you a little background of Erica's life. She was born in Southern California on November 4th, 1976. When born, she aspirated meconium, and she was in an intensive care unit for the first 8 days of her life. For a mama to be leaving the hospital without her child, can't even describe. Erica was placed on phenobarbital, and after 8 days in the ICU, we were allowed to bring her home. One of the most difficult things for a mother to do, as I said, is to leave the hospital without their child. At 11 months, Erica spiked a fever and again had, and again, firefighters came, helped me. Her dad, biological dad, was at a bowling event, so I was there by myself. Those firefighters again helped me, locked it up, put me in the ambulance, and away Erica and I went to the ER. And of course, you know, I'm reading this because if I look at you too much, I'm just gonna start bawling like a baby, so I can't do that. Her dad and I sought the best educational system possible, and thus we moved to Portland, and Erica started Kelly Center, which was part of the Columbia Regional Program for the Deaf. Erica was mainstreamed in her local elementary school with deaf and hard of hearing children. In 1995, she graduated from Aloha High School, and she went to PCC studying early childhood development, for which she received her associate's degree. While in high school, she was in the choir, and she was able to sing the introduction to The Lion Sleeps Tonight. So she, in her deaf way, was singing, "A-wum away, a-wum away, a-wum away." That was priceless. One cute story I want to share with you when she was little. I spoke in a high voice, and Erica put her arms on her waist, and she said, "Mommy, you don't have to yell, I'm not deaf." There's so many more stories that we could, but we're not here to talk about Erica. We're talking about your bravery and your service, not only to the city, but to the profession in itself, because what you do is, we just can't describe it. Now let me introduce you to another firefighter, and that's my husband, Dan Klauser, who served as a firefighter for the city of Portland, and he was a captain somewhere, I don't know, but he'll be able to share that with you. So let me just kind of say this. First of all, could I get a little cup of water? First of all, to the wives, partners, family members, thank you. Words cannot express what you sacrifice in sending your firefighters to work every day, knowing that they have so many things that they can encounter and rescue, rescue their own lives. And each other, because you guys you take care of each other. It's a brotherhood. Is that politically correct? Okay, so as I said, I finally see my daughter eating real people food. She still has the feeding tube in her tummy, and they're kind of weaning her off of that. But can you imagine not chewing food for over 6 months? That's what she's been going through. So because of you, I'm able to see her eat real people food again. Because of you, I get to help Erica transfer from her bed to the walker and transfer her to the portable toilet. Because of you. Because of you, I'm able to mark on my calendar when she gets a shower. Because I am able to write the status text messages to family of Erica's progress, because of you. Because of you, I am able to play the game now with her Quiddler. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You play the cards, and each letter has a value. So now she's able to create 3 and 4 letter words. She's pretty good at that one. But I have to tell you, she's even better at blackjack, and she beats me every time. Stepdad and I were there the other day, and Stepdad was the dealer. Erica was just so proud at beating the dealer at 21. Because of you, I am able to plan a trip to come visit us in Tucson in the future. Because of you, I am able to plan my next vacation with my daughter. Because of you, her hearing impaired friends are able to enjoy continued friendship. I'll end it with this, and I hope I don't start crying. Because of you, I was able to spend my last Mother's Day with Erica in her skilled nursing facility. Had it not been for your bravery and sacrifice, I may not have had that opportunity to simply say thank you, firefighters, for what you did for my Erica and what you firefighters do on a daily basis. I will always remember you every Mother's Day because of you, I get to continue celebrating that event. I think I read all of that. Oh, yeah, I did. I didn't put the paper down, did I? I cannot put into words what you young men did, the sacrifices you made, the bravery you have. I'm so proud of you, your unit, this city, and how the police department, I heard from so many firefighters and police, it's a miracle she's alive. Now I'll give you an update. The reason she's not here, she really wanted to be here. She now has some pneumonia in the left lung. She still has the trach and the secretions. They still have to use the suctioning to suction off that. She aspirated lots of black smoke. And for the in ICU, that's what was coming out. But you know that drill. She's able to now eat real people food. She, as you saw in the video, she's my little Scorpio, so she likes to get up on that walker and walk herself around, but of course with the assistance of the nurse. I'm thanking you from myself, from her biological dad, from her stepdad, Dan, for her close friends, Sue and Mandy, all the family and the friends that I've communicated with. This Saturday will mark 7 months since that accident. Because of you, my Erica is alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clusser. So today I'm honored to present two types of awards. The first is the Medal of Valor, which is awarded to a member of the fire department who in the line of duty distinguishes themselves in the performance of an act of courage involving risk of imminent serious physical injury with knowledge of such risk for the purpose of saving or protecting human life, or in the course of an extended investigation of a nature where they are continuously and singly exposed to grave personal hazard in the service of the department. In recognition of extraordinary rescue efforts to save a life on October 21st, 2021, I am pleased to present Lieutenant Ken Green, Driver Engineer Zach Bell, Firefighter Keith Youngblood, and Firefighter Stephen Kaw with this award. The second award is a special unit citation, which is awarded to any unit within the department or to any group of employees who have worked together towards a common goal. The citation is awarded for a specific performance of exceptional quality or for continued professional performance and dedication to duty by the unit as a whole. In recognition of extraordinary rescue efforts to save a life on October 21st, 2021, I'm pleased to present Lieutenant Andy Owens, Lieutenant Ryan Rudge, Driver Engineer Nathan Weichel, Firefighter Brandon Gasolin Plata, and Firefighter Luke Fortune with this award. Recognizing these members of the fire department as well as our other public safety, first responders, members of the Lake Oswego Police Department, and our LOCOM dispatchers who all participated in making this effort successful. Let's give these gentlemen and all on our team another big round of applause and congratulations. Thank you. They know.
Preservation Month, it's kind of a hard act to follow.
Yeah. Well, we're fortunate to have two award presentations this evening. And next is the Historic Preservation Month and Awards. Joining us is Mr. Paul Espy. Welcome, Mr. Espy.
Honorable Mayor and members of the council, it's great to be here. May is Preservation Month, and let's take action to save, celebrate, and discover places that reflect the breadth of American history. Since 1973, the National Trust for Historic Preservation has joined the preservation movement in celebrating historic places during May. This year, we are focusing Preservation Month on people saving places. It is a national high five to everyone doing great work on saving places in ways big and small, and inspiring others to do the same. I have with me this afternoon an individual who has on numerous occasions taken action to save places big and small in Lake Oswego. Shar Green, who has served on the Historic Resources Advisory Board as Vice Chair and Chair for more than 6 years, and has worked with members of ATRAB, the Oswego Heritage Council, and the community members on many projects that added to overall contribution to the city's historic preservation program. Before we do that, I just want to have a brief discussion on the Historic Preservation Grant Program. One of ATRAB's ongoing projects is the city's Historic Preservation Grant. The city of Lake Oswego offers match funding for the preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation of historic properties, and the city supports this effort by providing a historic preservation grant to finance a portion of this rehabilitation, which significantly contributes to the success of these projects. This year, ATRAB had 6 grant applicants, and they are all moving along very well. This grant funding is reimbursable upon the successful completion of the project, and grant applications again are available for this next cycle, and they're available in the Planning and Building Services Department or online on our website. So without any further ado, each year, the Historic Resources Advisory Board presents a merit award to an individual who has made significant contributions to the city's preservation effort. And Shar Green, who has contributed to the community's historic built environment through her participation with the Historic Resources Advisory Board and Heritage Council. In addition to the 6 years Shar served on ATRAB, she also served on the Heritage Council Board since 2015 as an executive director, and yes, from 2020 to 2022 as the executive director. Growing up in a house full of books, Shar loves to read history and biographies and is fascinated with genealogy. She was able to trace her husband's English heritage back to 1066 and found that she may be related to William the Conqueror. So we all better be on our best behavior this evening. Shar's passion for history, genealogy, and historic architecture are natural requisites for her accomplishments, and while serving on ATRAB, Shar partnered with Councilor Verdict to present successful arguments for the retention of the Bates House on the National Register of Historic Places. And Shar also served on ATRAB during the Carmen Farmhouse appeal to the state Supreme Court. Shar and Rachel also made historic design review and resource designation process more approachable by working with staff updating the Historic Preservation Code. As executive of the Heritage Council founded over 50 years ago, Shar created a retrospective exhibit for the opening of the new City Hall building. This was a large multi-paneled exhibit that provided a detailed chronology of the city of Lake Oswego, and she also expanded OHC's growing city archive by creating a library of house biographies and historic photographs of the city documenting their change over time. And I could go on and on about Shar Green, but I won't. But at this point in time, I would like to present the award to Shar. If anybody else from ATRAB would like to come up with me and present this award.
Congratulations.
And in closing, we just want to thank everyone who has attended the meeting and to those individuals who have helped make the city's historic preservation program such a success. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Espy. And we are also proclaiming the month of May to be National Historic Preservation Month. Of course, we welcome and welcome everyone to join in the many activities and just this bestow themselves of all the great information that our community organizations put out around historic preservation. So thank you all for your efforts and what you do. They're greatly appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So kind of in line with historic preservation, we are going to talk about the City Hall time capsule now, which outside of council chambers here and for a little bit more time, on display are some of the items that are going to go into the time capsule. And so, but today we're marking the symbolic closing of the City Hall time capsule. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the table out there, but there's some great kind of memorabilia from kind of current time, including items from the fire department, different city departments, as well as just things going on in general. I saw a couple of, cell phones out there and a digital camera. And was there a COVID test kit out there? I don't think that there are COVID test kits. That's hopefully they won't be needing those. I want to thank the Lake Oswego Review, the Lake Oswego School District, the Chamber of Commerce, the Lake Oswego Preservation Society, Oswego Heritage Council, and the many city departments for their contributions. And also thank you to the city's Youth Leadership Council for their list of ideas as well. The capsule will remain unopened until a future city hall is constructed. So hopefully, well, it says there's some options. It could be 50, 60, or 70 years from now, but hopefully, yeah, it should be, yes. The time capsule will be placed in an underground vault in front of the police department entrance with the city's logo manhole to mark the spot, because we wouldn't want to be unable to find it in the future, right? Yeah. So I invite everyone to take time and visit the display. There are also cards on which you can write a note that will go in the time capsule. So, yeah, so it's a great thing, and hopefully all of us are dead when they unearth it. Yeah, a sign of a great building, I mean, if we're uncovering this in 20 years, we got a lot of problems. Okay. So. All right.
Does the city manager have to leave a note in your desk and you have to pass it from city manager to city manager to make sure that we remember to get the capsule?
Don't leave the capsule.
Don't leave the capsule.
Okay.
Right.
So now we're going to move into public comment. I know that we have a few folks joining us on Zoom, and we're going to take that public comment first, and if there's anyone here that would like to provide comment. I don't think so. So first we have Cynthia Johnson, who is the vice chair of the 50 Plus Advisory Board. There she is. Hi,
there
Ms.
I
Johnson.
am. Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm not at my best, so bear with me today. Thank you physically, but I appreciate being here. And yes, I am the vice chair of the 50 Plus Advisory Committee, and in the context of this meeting, I wear many hats. I am also, as you know, served on the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee, and I had the opportunity to, in one meeting, to share put input into the ADA, some of the ADA issues that will come before you. And I also am here personally, not just with the groups that I represent today. So I think the word intersection gets used a lot these days when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And certainly today's agenda shows that we have now reached that point where housing issues, accessibility issues, and affordability issues all come together. And I'm happy to be here, but I'm sorry, I'm really not doing well. had to be on 3 federal advocacy calls with U.S. senators today for my disease, which in some respects made me think of you all, because I have ME/CFS, as you know, a disease that's been neglected for decades, as has accessible housing for seniors, and affordable housing in this community. And so sometimes ours to do becomes issues that have not been dealt with previously. So I know a lot of these issues have been at the forefront of my committee's work the last 3 years as vice chair. There's always been multi-generational housing, affordable housing, and accessible housing. And these are very important issues. But I also recently started to glance at the 2005 report that said the same thing. Seniors and people with disabilities needed housing in this community. And so somehow I think decades ago, things were not addressed in the way they should have, and now this all falls on our plate. And so I'm encouraging you as the city council to, as you look at these issues, I certainly support middle housing, as you know, and affordability, accessibility, but this is a time where detached units, I think, need to be an option still. They were on the table. They had the highest consensus vote in 2. There were 2. It was addressed twice in the Middle Code Housing Advisory Committee. The Senior Plus Committee, or the 50. I'm sorry, I'm really not doing well. I am not well enough to advocate 4 times a day. So bear with me. But as I wrote in, I think the city code and policies need to be updated to both include and promote more accessible housing, detached duplexes and triplexes at least, as well as incentives for universal design. And I couldn't help but think, as I am so fond of our fire department here too. They have certainly carried me in and out of buildings when I was bedridden and to emergency rooms. But in some respects, for all people that with disabilities or some of the most vulnerable seniors in our community, housing and accessible housing is a healthcare issue. It is a rescue issue. I have got worse myself personally during this pandemic because I don't have housing that works for my disability. Disabilities are so different. And so this is going to fall on all of you. And I'm asking, that these issues be addressed now, soon, as part of these discussions. So, maybe not in the time capsule, but when they look back, they'll say that you were the city council that did something. And I do believe that you all care, because there would not be a DEI process. There wouldn't be an ADA coordinator in the city. And contrary to popular belief, I will not be here always I will not always be on some committee in Lake Oswego and talk to you. But I hope that, my committee and the work that you've done and the work that you've initiated will make lasting change for seniors and people with disabilities, because it is not a luxury, and we will never have true diversity, equity in this community if we don't address ableism, disableism, ageism. These are life issues for people. So I thank you for your time. It is my privilege. I love my 50 plus advisory board. We really are trying to look forward to, I'm going to be honest, for you, as you all know, I lost my house and it was foreclosed 5 years ago. Now it's double what it was, but it's too late for me and my son. But I know some of these issues may not help me and my son, but I believe that if you can act in a very forward-thinking way right now, they will help prevent what happened to us and many other people with disabilities and their families and seniors, from this happening in the future. And today I was so moved by people with my illness on Senate calls who've been disabled through no fault of their own since they were either 10 years old with this disease or for 4 decades. Mm-hmm. And disability is the one thing that can happen to anyone. So I encourage you to give us choices and let us as families have housing that works for us. And I do think detached units are a very important choice in the scenario that needs to address sooner than later. But I also want to thank you that we are doing ADA work in the city. I know you're going to hear an update on that. I appreciate the Middle Code Housing Advisory Task Force. It was a great group, and I still hope you look at our consensus votes on that. And the 50 Plus Advisory Board is a great group of people too. So it's my pleasure to serve, and I thank you for your time. Always, if you have questions, you know where to find me. I'm sorry I'm not more eloquent today, but I am literally exhausted. And literally, I am the face of somebody whose health is worse because there isn't appropriate housing for my disability. So I think that's always something to take in mind, that housing can be a life-saving and a health-affirming issue for many of our seniors and many people with disabilities in our community of all ages. So thank you for your time. I don't know if you take questions or I'm sorry I'm not more eloquent today, but I'm literally exhausted.
Fine. You're just fine. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate your service on the advisory board.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rise to I have faith in all of you. Thank you.
We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Next, we have Georgina Moran.
Georgiana, if you could unmute.
There we go.
There we go.
Hi, Ms. Moran.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, well, again, I too really appreciate the opportunity to be addressing the council directly today. Thank you. My concern is at one of Lake Oswego's Prime Park locations, Stephen Meadows, and how it's non-compliant with the ADA. I'm a park user, avid park user. I'm also an accessibility specialist with Access for All LLC and the founder of Access Recreation, where I partner with federal, city, and state organizations, providing equitable access to parks and trails in regards to people living with disabilities. So Stevens Meadows was recommended for me to go and check out. The Lake Oswego website didn't have any information on it, so I went to All Trails, and they considered it an easy route. Popular for birding and hiking and enjoyable with some solitude. So I went out there, and there's a dead end parking lot or parking street that you're allowed to park on. There were 2 cars on the left-hand side, filled up the whole left-hand side. So I was able to park on the right, and I wasn't able to deploy my my ramp, so I wasn't able to get out and use the trail at all. So then I find out that there was a proposal. Stevens Meadows had a proposal for a parking lot and accessible parking spaces and accessible restroom that was thwarted because of a citizens measure that passed. It was in the bidding phase, and the passage just stopped any changes. The charter amendment allowed projects that applied for a master plan to proceed, but the Stephen Meadows project didn't require a master plan, so it wasn't pursued. I mean, Ivan Anderson, or Anderholm, the director of Lake Oswego Parks and Rec, said that it wasn't adopted because it was developed under the Clackamas County's Development Code, which doesn't require a master plan. So again, the ADA, allows for other parks similar to, in similar locations to fulfill the accessibility requirements. and there is another park nearby, the Cook's Butte. But, you know, sometimes people access the Butte Trail from one location or another, depending on the length or duration of hike they want. But both do not have a parking lot or adequate parking at all. And to add to the problem even more, at Stevens Meadows, the dead-end parking street, you have to back out onto a two-way street to get out because there's no room to turn around. So, you know, my hope is that, you know, you on the committee, you know, and Lake Oswego in general can, you know, move from ally to accomplice and, you know, help provide a solution to the obstacle that the passage of the citizens measure created. You know, meet ADA compliance and equitable access. And, you know, I hope that, that you can be instrumental in providing a solution so everyone will be able to enjoy this natural resource. You know, I mean, I'm not alone with people with disabilities in, you know, Lake Oswego and surrounding areas that just want to get out and enjoy nature, you know, especially during this time, you know, of COVID, you know, it's really important to get out, you know, and again, this just seems like it could be solvable, you know, with additional resources and help. So thank you. Appreciate you listening.
Thank you, Ms. Moran. We all hear you for certain. We appreciate you being here. Thank you.
You bet.
Our next community member for public comment is Tara Wilkinson.
Hi, can you hear me all
Ms.
right?
Wilkinson, yes, welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor Beck and councilors, for the opportunity to speak with you today in support of the City of Lake Oswego's work to advance ADA and beyond ADA access to parks, trails, and nature. My name is Tara Wilkinson, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Intertwine Alliance, which is a coalition of 80 public, private, and nonprofit partners advocating for parks, trails, and nature and equitable access to nature throughout the Portland, Vancouver metropolitan region. We do this work intersectionally with our friends in housing and transportation for maximum benefit to all communities. Our coalition has been doing its thing for 11 or 12 years, and the City of Lake Oswego has been a longtime partner. So thank you for that. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Intertwine Alliance, but also in coordination with Georgina Moran of Access Recreation. And more detailed written comments that I submitted earlier this week on the same topic were co-signed by the statewide Oregon Trails Coalition. So we're here today to express support for the work the city has begun to increase equitable access to parks and trails. We are excited that you've created a full-time position to refine and accelerate the city's ADA transition plan, and that you've engaged a group of community stakeholders, including Georgina Moran, to set priorities within that plan. So yes, we're excited about the advisory group, and we want to encourage you to keep expanding and diversifying it to include greater representation of people experiencing various types of disabilities and who have other lived experiences related to lack of access, including people of color. We understand that identifying and recruiting individuals for this type of work can be very challenging, and we welcome and invite you to call on the Intertwine Alliance to help as needed. We originally reached out to your wonderful ADA coordinator, Kelly Bird, about the Stevens Meadow Trailhead project. We understand that the city had plans to add ADA accessible parking spots and an ADA compliant bathroom at the Stephen Meadows Trailhead. Stevens Meadow, got my plurals wrong there, which would have effectively created access for both it and nearby Cooks Butte. We also understand that it was the citizens' measure passed last November, amending the city charter to restrict development, that blocked that project. That city charter amendment has created obstacles to ADA compliance and to operationalizing our shared values of equitable access. And as you of course know, meeting ADA standards is a legal requirement when building or altering public parks and trails. The current situation at Stevens Meadow does not meet basic ADA needs, much less go beyond ADA to achieve truly equitable access. So Intertwine Alliance joins our colleagues at Access Recreation in calling for a solution that delivers this planned and much needed access. Intertwine Alliance wants to be a partner and keep being a partner with the City of Lake Oswego to find a solution and a path forward. So thank you so much for your time today and for prioritizing access for people of all abilities.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. We appreciate your comments and we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Linder, any other public comment?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Okay, well, with that, we are going to move into our first public hearing, which is on Ordinance 2892, which is an ordinance of the City of Lake Oswego amending the Community Development Code to comply with Oregon House Bill 2001, which is state legislation requiring that cities allow middle housing, including duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters in areas that permit detached single-family dwellings, and adopt findings and conclusions for LU 22-0007. To start the process, I will ask Mr. Luce to read the legislative hearing procedures for us.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a legislative hearing, so members of a recognized neighborhood association, homeowners association, and government agency have 10 minutes to speak. All others have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Luce. We are going to start with the staff report. We have Eric Olson here to deliver it. Welcome, Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Mayor Buck, and thank you other councilors that are here tonight. So pursuant to the City Council goal to conserve the community's quality of life by planning for growth and change, and the Council initiative to adopt codes that comply with House Bill 2001 that are consistent with the community's sense of place, neighborhood character, and livability, staff has developed draft code amendments to comply with House Bill 2001 based on specific direction from the City Council and Planning Commission throughout the course of several years. So this includes recent changes based on input from the Planning Commission at the Planning Commission public hearing. And we're here to talk today really just about how the direction that we received from yourselves and the Planning Commission translated into proposed amendments within the code itself, and to answer any questions that you may have prior to public testimony. So here's a quick look at the topics I'll be touching on today, and I'll do my best to highlight some of the issues that we haven't touched upon much previously. I know we've talked about House Bill 2001 fairly in depth at the council, but I'll do my best to highlight some of the newer sort of issues that have come into play. All right, so I'll talk about the process to start out. So we've talked, as I mentioned, a lot about middle housing with the council throughout the past years. So this all started back in 2019, actually, when council directed staff to monitor the state's rulemaking process surrounding House Bill 2001. So the legislation was initially passed in summer of 2019. So we started for about a year after that, providing monthly written and oral updates to the Planning Commission based on council direction. That was to capture the rulemaking process, and once the state had adopted the rules that are known as Division 46, which occurred in late 2020, we worked and started to bring on a consultant and look at how to respond to those rules, essentially try to understand those rules and try to develop some different options for responding. So that's when we started working with Cascadia Partners, consultants that we've been lucky enough to have on board throughout the process, using a grant from DLCD. and we've been able to benefit from them ever since then, though it's just me here tonight. With Cascadia's help, we were able to conduct extensive research and analysis of neighborhood conditions and patterns, really hoping to better understand the existing city fabric through both quantitative and qualitative analyses. So this included interviews with representatives from 17 different neighborhood associations, as well as a widely distributed neighborhood character survey that received about 880 different responses. So fairly robust outreach phase there. Cascadia also conducted an audit of our community development code to determine what needed to be amended for compliance. And we took sort of the results of all this work and determined different alternative implementation options that were outlined in something called the Middle Housing Opportunities Report. So that sort of culminated in a presentation to both the Planning Commission and the City Council to talk about some of the recommendations and get some direction at that phase early summer last year, about a year ago. So then we moved on to phase 2 of the project. Early summer of last year, per council direction, a Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee, or an ad hoc Middle Housing Advisory Committee, was appointed with a balanced membership of about 13 different members representing a diverse set of interests. So there were about six meetings from the advisory committee between July and October of last year. Recommendations that resulted from those meetings are summarized in the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee Key Issues memo. So we really got a lot of really good input from that process on different topics. A lot of what we're talking about today really focuses on the design and dimensional standard related recommendations that resulted from that process. But we did hear a lot about preservation of existing residential structures, runoff and stormwater impacts that could result from new middle housing, and affordability and accessibility issues. So I will mention a little bit about where those issues are at the end of the presentation. So at that point, we had sort of a lot of recommendations from the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee, and we brought that to City Council in fall of last year. At that point, we received direction from Council more or less to pursue the recommendations developed by the committee that were required to be adopted by the June 30th, 2022 deadline. And so that's really what we then decided to focus on. We conducted extensive community engagement since then. So we held 2 community forums, one back in December and one in March of this year. We also conducted another survey and were able to get more input on some of the specific code recommendations at that point. And we conducted an additional 4 work sessions with the Planning Commission to sort of refine our recommendations. We brought those to City Council earlier this year in February and have been moving forward with guidance that we received from that point forward. So we, from that point on, we released finally the draft code amendments on March 7th of this year. We hosted a hearing at the Planning Commission on April 11th, so a little bit over a month ago. And of course, here we are today at the City Council public hearings. So a long-winded explanation of the process, but I just really wanted to not give short shrift to all of the work that we put into this. This is really a pretty big milestone for the project. So a lot of thought has gone into this, clearly. So now I will talk a little bit more about the specific amendments that we're proposing within the code and how those translated. So as we've discussed before, we had to sort of add a new middle housing definition to align with the minimum compliance requirements. We separated triplexes and quadplexes from multifamily, the definition of multifamily residential units in the areas where Division 46 would apply. We changed the definition of duplex a bit just to be more specific and in line with Division 46. We added a number of new definitions for cottage cluster, including cottage cluster dwelling, common courtyard, and cottage cluster footprint. And we also added definitions for townhouse and townhouse project. We did a bit of cleanup within the code. There were other terms like attached townhouse dwelling and zero lot line dwelling and row house. So we found that all those terms are essentially referring to the same thing and just wanted to streamline it by calling them townhouses. So as we've discussed again previously, Division 46 requires that middle housing be allowed broadly in most residential zones throughout the city. So you can see on the map where those zones are located. In terms of the code itself, we had to go through and obviously in the applicability statements do this, as well as the purpose statements. And very big deal, yeah.
Like, no. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what they had to do in like California and other states.
That's
where
gonna
they
be
could
crazy.
Mhm.
And I was talking to people in California, and they're like, don't know what's gonna happen down here. And I stick with the
Well, yeah,
right,
that's,
if
that's for
there's an
sure.
ocean view,
Oh,
or
gosh,
setting
yeah.
there, that's not where you're gonna see this big change.
That's right, yeah.
So don't
Yeah, we're not
freak
talking about
out.
penthouse units and
Right,
things
if you
like
live
that.
on a hill,
Yeah.
you're good to go.
Mhm.
If you live by a body of water.
Yeah. Something tells me that market's not gonna change anytime
No,
soon.
I don't think so.
That's a
I could
good
be
point,
wrong.
very good point, yeah.
Probably wouldn't get done. Except for the sunshine part of here.
Forced recess.
you. Okay, we're back in order from the technical difficulties. Thank you for your patience. All right, Mr. Olson.
Thank you. I can go over this information again, but I will just remind folks that the point of the slide is that we're allowing this in most of our residential districts, all of the formal R districts, from R15, R10, R75, all the way down to R0 and RW. And a quick note, we've discussed this previously, but it's really important to remember that covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs, will impact where middle housing can be constructed, even if we do allow it through underlying zoning. So as we've discussed previously, there are many CC&Rs that are active in the city. Often they're associated with either a homeowners association or a planned unit development or a planned development. So neither the state nor the city have the authority to change any agreements that were adopted prior to 2020. So essentially you can't adopt new CC&Rs that could prevent the construction of new middle housing at this point, but anything that existed prior to that date would still be enforceable. So middle housing needs to be allowed broadly in most residential zones, as we looked at on a few slides back. And this required an extensive update to the use tables in LOC 53002 to essentially permit all those middle housing types in the zones where they're required to be permitted. So you can see on the slide here, this is just a quick indication of the zones where the middle housing types were not allowed under our current zoning. And so you see there were a number of different zones where we had to go through and allow them. So the city did not have much flexibility within the parameters of Division 46 regarding the locations where duplexes must be allowed. Specifically, duplexes were required to allow those on non-conforming lots of record, even more or less the same provisions that apply to single family to a very specific level also have to apply to duplexes per the minimum compliance requirements from the state. The city does, though, have some flexibility to control the locations where what they call higher middle housing or triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses could be allowed. So these housing types would still need to meet underlying siting standards and as such could not be constructed on a non-conforming lot. So the Planning Commission also recommended that we require lots for triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters that are larger than what would be required for single-family homes in the districts where we could do that. So essentially, for triplex, 6,000 square feet is the sort of lowest minimum lot size that we can, the lowest minimum lot size where they would be allowed to be constructed for the most part. So if you're in an R5 district, you'd have to have a 6,000 square foot lot, whereas other housing types, you need a 5,000 square foot lot. So you can see that for these particular types of housing, particularly in a mid or low density zone, they would not be allowed to be constructed on the same lots as a duplex or a single family home. And I would just also remind you all that this is consistent with the resident preferences that we heard about from the multiple surveys that were conducted throughout the process. Yeah, I mean, so essentially in the surveys, we asked folks whether they would want to allow, essentially require, I guess is the easiest way to say it, is require that lots for triplexes, cottage clusters, and quadplexes be larger than what we would require for other middle housing types, which we were allowed to do under the bill.
In here?
Yes, so essentially we're responding to the comments that we heard, which directly said that they recommended that we do this thing, which is to require that these particular types of middle housing have larger lots than other types.
Larger lots that are required? Or
larger minimum lot size that's required. That's right.
Oh, okay.
All right, so Division 46 prohibits cities from applying maximum density standards to duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. So to comply with the minimum compliance route, we had to eliminate any provisions related to maximum density for those housing types, basically all middle housing besides townhouses, in the R15, R10, R75, R5, RDD, RW, and R3 zones, basically anywhere where we did have a maximum density provision. In terms of townhouses, the maximum density that we're proposing is 4 times the density for single-family dwellings in that zone. So the Division 46 minimum compliance rules allowed the city to adopt a maximum density at that level of 4 times what is allowed for single-family dwellings, but no more, no less. We also propose to further specify that the density of townhouses may be no more than 4 units per attached townhouse structure. So that's a little bit of more of a clarification that DLCD had asked for. So we had been referring to them as a townhouse project, but it's a townhouse structure specifically that we're allowed to apply that 4 times density maximum to. When it comes to cottage clusters, the minimum compliance provision were similar in that we could establish roughly a minimum density of 4 units per acre, but note that that's a minimum density, so it does work slightly different. But that is technically a minimum density regulation that applies to cottage clusters. And all density limitations that applied on a per dwelling basis were removed from the code, again, to comply with Division 46.
Mr. Olson, what's the relationship between the density and the zone size?
Generally speaking, minimum lot size is the proxy that we're going to use now. So we did have some sort of maximum density provisions and number of units per acre type language in some of our code. But for the most part, under the proposed amendments, we're relying on minimum lot size more or less to act as a proxy for density. So when you think about an R10 district, you're allowed to build roughly, 4 units per that sort of minimum lot size. 10,000 square foot lot size would be the minimum lot size in an R10. So it's not technically density. Again, we're not allowed to apply density limitations to this type of housing, but you can only, construct a certain number of units per lot. And it's based on the minimum lot size specifically, not tied to density per se.
So in the R10, you could build 4 units because it's 4 times the...
In any density, or in any district, an R5, R75, whatever it would be, wherever you can construct a single family lot, you could construct up to 4 units on that same lot, more or less.
Well, except for the lot size minimum.
That's right, yeah. When it comes to townhouses, it's a bit different, but any lot that meets the minimum lot size of a given zone would be allowed to have middle housing at roughly 4 times the same rate as you would get it. But then there, of course, there are some exceptions to that we'll talk about for minimum lot size for triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters.
Right. So R5, for instance, you did duplex, allowed in the R5, but no triplex. They need a 6,000 square foot lot, right?
Yeah, so it's allowed, but they would be required to have a 6,000 square feet lot in that zone. That's right.
They happen to have a lot bigger than yeah.
Yeah, and you do often see, that the common lot sizes are well above a minimum lot size in some zones. It's not like all R5 districts have exactly 5,000 square foot lots, but it is definitely less common to have a 6,000 square foot lot.
So I'm still not getting my head wrapped around the density part. When you say 4 times the density for single family dwellings, if you can build a house and it takes up so much volume, let's just say 100, how does this change that? Let's just say that the measurement is 100. When you times it by 4, they can put 400 on that lot?
So if we're talking about square footage, let's just say, 100 square feet is not the actual amount that you can build on a lot, but if it were, you could not build 4 times what's allowed in terms of the size of the structure, but the number of units would have to be more. So you'd have to take the exact same envelope and sort of divide it into more units than just 1.
So we're still under the, because I think we had a lot of feedback to, regardless if it was a single house or a duplex or a triplex or fourplex, it still had to take the same volume that's under our current code. Is that correct?
That's correct. Cottage clusters are a bit nuanced when it comes to that, but yeah.
But okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will get into that in a moment and make that a bit more clear. So with respect to review procedures, this is another fairly major shift of the bill. One of the biggest sort of shifts really is that middle housing will be subject to the same review processes as detached single-family dwellings in that same zone. So the development of a triplex, quadplex, townhouse project, cottage cluster, while that might be considered a minor decision today, a minor development, it would be considered a ministerial decision under the proposed code amendments, and that's kind of part and parcel with allowing these within the zone is allowing it through that process. So we'll use our existing ministerial procedure for the review of triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. And because we're doing this, we're going to basically be creating some new standards for those, and I will be talking about our process for that in just a little bit of what we'll do for new ministerial applications. But for the most part, there will be fairly significant shift in the way that we process ministerial development, so that we are able to ask for public improvements to be provided that are at least proportional to the development that's being proposed. So I will say that there are a few exceptions to when middle housing would be a ministerial decision. Townhouses would still require a land division, so that would still be considered minor development. In the RDD zone, the way it's currently set up is that all development is minor development, so that would continue to be the case. And variances would continue to require minor development. So I'd also note that we did modify the variance standards a bit to ensure that they applied equally to single family and other types of housing. So middle housing created through the conversion of a single family dwelling is exempted from the building design standards. It must be pursuant to Division 46. So that's what we've proposed. For additions to single family dwelling that result in the creation of middle housing, we really only apply building standards to the portion, basically any newly added or replaced portion of the structure. So we can't go back and retroactively force buildings to comply with our code, but if you're not allowed to increase any nonconformity in any newly constructed component of the house would still have to comply with our code. The proposed code amendments would also ensure that we treat middle housing similarly to single family development for the purpose of non-conforming development in just a sort of overarching sense. All right, and so here's a graphic just kind of illustrating a bit of what I mentioned earlier. You can see what our dimensional standards really look like when applied to middle housing. So you can see that all the same standards that are applied currently to single family housing would also be applied to duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and townhouse projects. So these are things like minimum setbacks, maximum floor area, maximum lot coverage, maximum height, and setback planes. So you can see some of these illustrated here on the slide. They're all different depending on the zone, but whatever the sort of setback or floor area or lot coverage is in an underlying zone would also apply to middle housing. And so you can see kind of what that concept looks like when applied to different types of housing. So hopefully this kind of gets at the question that Councilor Wendland had a moment ago. This is sort of what we were talking about when we talk about 4 times the density of a single family house on the same lot. It couldn't be a larger structure. It would still be subject to the same lot coverage standards, the same maximum floor area standards, the same setbacks, and as we call it, a setback plane as single family homes. Cottage clusters are a bit of a different beast, and I will talk a little bit about those in a moment. And I would also just point out, you can see for townhouses, you can see that the main difference between a townhouse and a quadplex is really that the townhouse units are 1 dwelling unit per lot. So it's really similar to a quadplex, but it's just, facilitates the purchase, buying and selling of those units a little bit easier and would require a land division. All right, so here's another graphic just kind of outlining the different dimensional standards that we have and how they would apply to not just single family housing, but different types of middle housing. So again, setbacks, maximum height, setback plane, the height exceptions that we would allow for buildings that provide wider setbacks would also be allowed for middle housing. and we'd have different setback standards. The same that we do for steeply sloped lots today would also be extended to middle housing. So we do have some different standards for single family and steeply sloped lots right now that would convey to middle housing. And this is just kind of an overlay where you can see the idea of lot coverage and floor area in addition to what I've talked about before. So again, all these standards would continue to apply to middle housing as they do today, to single family. All right, so I'll move on to design standards next. As with dimensional standards, design standards for single family dwellings would be applied to middle housing in order to comply with Division 46. So this includes standards such as the side yard appearance and screening, long wall planes, solar access, circulation, street connectivity, and transit standards. It also includes design standards unique to specific areas such as overlay districts or within the R6 zone, which is somewhat like an overlay district in some ways. And we also went beyond the minimum Division 46 compliance standards per Planning Commission and City Council guidance, of course, to really look at the garage appearance and location standards in particular to fine-tune and improve those sort of existing single-family garage appearance and location standards to better address the negative visual impacts of front-facing garages and driveways, which a lot of folks, again, in the surveys that were conducted in previous years expressed a lot of concern about. That was the number one sort of, I guess, the least liked physical component of neighborhoods that we found through that survey was visually prominent garages. So we did our best to sort of address those concerns with our work here. So with respect to driveways, per direction from the Planning Commission, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes would be subject to the same driveway standards as a single-family home. So that means that on lots with less than 70 feet of frontage, only one driveway would be allowed for both single-family or middle housing development. A single driveway would still be required to be shared by all residents to access their parking spaces or garage stalls on these lots, and two driveways would still be permitted on lots that have more than 75 feet of frontage. So we thought that, again, this was in keeping with some of the recommendations to preserve neighborhood character and sense of place by reducing additional access points to the street and encouraging more of that front yard to remain unpaved and landscaped when possible. So under the existing code, the maximum width of a driveway approach is limited to 12 feet per parking space for single-family dwellings, but not to exceed 30 feet. Other uses are limited to a maximum driveway approach of 24 feet. So applying the existing driveway and garage standards to a townhouse project would allow for each townhouse unit or lot to have its own driveway, which is necessary for compliance with Division 46. But we did note that issues could arise when a townhouse project includes fewer townhouses or is located on a wider lot. Under the existing code, that driveway approach could potentially end up being larger than the width of the garage itself. So we wanted to address that issue with some direction from the Planning Commission. So we drafted amendments that would limit the width of driveways on smaller townhouse lots to less than the width of the garage opening. And we also are proposing to newly apply the garage and driveway standards to front-facing garages on lots with less than 50 feet of width. So currently, we wouldn't apply garage standards to these narrow lots. And under our proposal, we're proposing to allow for sort of a unique, sort of context-specific way for garages to be constructed on lots that are less than 50 feet in width. So instead of just saying, you're not going to have any garage standards, we're trying to refine them and make them more appropriate for those particular instances. So much of the Commission's input on design standards was related to garage and location, as I mentioned before. These standards regulate how garages are integrated with single-family housing and duplexes currently. So in order to comply with Division 46, the same garage standards must apply to middle housing that apply to detached single-family. So more visually prominent garages, as we mentioned before, was a concern that we heard along the way that could really be exacerbated by middle housing. Particularly considering that you're requiring more parking for these types of housing, you could easily see that middle housing, particularly something like a quadplex, would be likely to build with more garage stalls than a single-family house or duplex. So we proposed a number of modifications to the standards essentially to try to accommodate that likelihood. The commission directed staff to draft code that would require garage recessing for wider garages as opposed to simply offering it as one potential option for compliance. We also were directed by the commission to allow exceptions to increase the width of the garage to 75%. But again, that's only for lots that are less than 50 feet in width. So we're really thinking about townhouses and how to encourage good garage design outcomes with a townhouse. So the idea is that the overall width of garages would generally be limited to less than 60% of the width of the front facade for lots wider than 50 feet. For lots that are less than 50 feet in width, we would allow for a slightly wider garage, but would require more garage appearance and mitigation to sort of accommodate that width.
Eric, how would that, how would those standards change that previous slide, you know, the bottom photograph there? I mean, is that photograph representative of these standards?
So the photograph is representative of recessed garages. The photographs, you know, I'm not exactly sure of how wide the lot is in this particular instance, but the particular garage appearance sort of mitigation ideas that we have been thinking about include garage recessing or having individual garage stalls. I guess this isn't necessarily individual stall, but you can see that there's windows on the garage stalls. That's another sort of garage appearance item that you can check off the list, and we have a number of standards that you'd have to meet for a wider garage. So more or less what we're proposing is for, you know, basically the wider your garage gets, the more design components and features you have to add to your garage.
I see, but that may not be, I mean, we don't know. That these may be, they seem to take up the entire, you know, frontage. They seem to be the frontage. So they're probably more than 75%, but who knows what the width of the lot is.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's most likely a wide lot. So, you know, I think, again, I'm not sure exactly what the width is there.
And is this what we're going for with the driveway? I mean, this is kind of an odd, because the entire, you know, it's like a massive driveway.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you know, we're showing this because we did like the recessing, and there's some appearance things that they're doing to the garage that make it a little bit less prominent. Right. But obviously, it's a very wide garage. So in some ways, kind of, you know, it's trying to show, you know, in some ways what we're trying to solve for here to a degree. And so it's one example of things that exist in the neighborhood right now that's middle housing or
but
like
this
exists in the
one's
city.
I know this particular, I walked past this thing, and it's set way back off the street. It's kind of different. It's not on the street. It's kind of has its own driveway that then goes back into, you know, so.
Yeah, I mean, it might be the case that this was constructed as a townhouse development. I'm not positive. But if it were, then, you know, currently we do have exceptions for basically that, you know, lots that are under 50 feet in width don't have to comply with the garage appearance standards. So that could be at play here as well.
I was just going to comment on this project in Lake Grove or in Waluga. So these garages, I believe, are oriented to the back, and there's a driveway, common drive that goes to the back of the property where these are accessed. And so the standards may be different if it's not street facing, from what I understand, but I think the point here is on the architectural detailing and the treatments that are required to make the garages less prominent. So that's helpful.
This is the back. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think this is a sort of rear of where the porches are in the front of the house. Yeah.
Never even seen the front. Hidden front.
You're backwards.
The back. It is on the street. I know, kind of funny.
I'm sorry, was that a question, Councilor?
Yeah, is it the back of the house? Or?
That is what Scott had indicated, yeah.
Many options.
So these are, again, examples that are in the community right now. So under our standards, you know, again, to sort of further minimize the prominence of these garages more than we do in our code currently, you know, we discuss different sort of ways that we could scale the standards to be more aggressive, if you will, the sort of wider that the garage becomes as a sort of percentage of the front facade, at least. So the commission, planning commission concurred with our recommendation as staff to come up with a configuration more or less like this, where you have a higher minimum garage setback required for a wider garage, as well as more garage appearance standards that have to be met. So you can see that with a not very wide garage, less than 30% in width, you'd only have to meet 2 of those appearance standards, and between 60 and 75%, you have to meet 4. So when we're talking about those standards, this is what we're talking about. You could either provide individual garage doors for each parking stall. You can provide windows on the garage door. You can provide separate garage openings that are offset from one another by at least 2 feet. You can provide a decorative trellis, pergola, or other feature giving the perception that it's a recessed garage, covered porch, or a patio. So there's different ways to sort of mitigate the potential visual prominence of these garages. And this is what we came up with as the different options that folks can choose from. All right, so that covers, for the most part, garage appearance and location. Moving.
Oh, yes.
I have a bunch of other questions, but I'll wait until you're done. So I see a lot of trellises that look almost like carports in certain parts of town when I'm out walking. You know, it's just a trellis and they put, I don't know, clear plastic or something on the top to kind of convert it to a garage space. And it's not bad. I mean, if it's a nice trellis look, it actually mitigates some of the garage look a little bit. But is that something that...
So this wouldn't be instead of providing a garage necessarily. This would be in addition to the garage, right?
They couldn't do it instead. Okay, great, thanks.
Are there any other questions that I could address before moving on?
Thank you for entertaining the question. There's so many topics here. It's kind of easier just to pick off the questions while you have the slide.
Yeah, I definitely understand.
Going back 50 later. Thank you.
Sorry
So
about that.
yeah, please feel free to interrupt on that note.
Do you need any water or anything?
I'm doing all right.
Okay,
thanks.
Just let us know, because this is a long one.
I've done this enough times that hopefully I can get through it without having too much water here. All right, so on to cottage clusters here. So given the direction from council and the nature of the Division 46 rules, this is really an area where we didn't have much room to move. We didn't have much flexibility to modify the siting standards for cottage clusters. So our proposal is really pursuant to the minimum compliance provisions. We would propose to adopt many of the provisions in the DLCD model code, which is sort of the way that the minimum compliance works here. So that basically allows us to either adopt the model code or a less restrictive version of the model code in Lake Oswego. So we did have a few items or a few different areas where we had some flexibility here. We got to choose the number of cottages in a cluster. So we did discuss that both with the City Council and the Planning Commission. We landed on a minimum of 5 cottages per cluster based on direction that we received from both of these bodies, essentially to ensure that there's no overlap between a quadplex and a cottage cluster. This will be a detached form of housing, so it'd be nice to have sort of a clear demarcation between 4-unit and 5-unit form of housing. That was kind of the rationale that we chose to sort of separate cottage clusters from other middle housing types, and to avoid confusion with potential detached plexes or something of that nature in the future. We also have proposed a maximum of 8 cottages, both per cottage cluster and per lot. So that is one change that we understood from DLCD. We got some conflicting direction, but essentially after direction from the Planning Commission, we were able to ascertain that we had the ability to set the number of cottages, the maximum number of cottages at 8 per lot. So, there is only 1 cottage cluster allowed per lot and only 8 cottages per cluster at max. Another sort of other elements that I want to talk about with our cottage cluster proposal here is that the footprint of each cottage must be 900 square feet or less. So this is really just talking about the bottom story of a cottage. This is not floor area per se, this is just the footprint, but That is one of the biggest requirements of the model code, that they be no larger than 900 square feet. Other than that, cottage clusters are exempt from lot coverage standards. So while you might see lot coverage applied to other middle housing, it wouldn't specifically apply to a cottage cluster. It would just be that 900 square foot maximum footprint. When it comes to setbacks, that is another sort of fairly different element of cottage clusters, is that 10-foot minimum setback is required on all sides, or no more than a 10-foot minimum setback in the sort of state's way of thinking of things. So that's what we propose, is 10 feet on the front, rear, and sides for cottage clusters, and 10 feet minimum distance between buildings within a cottage cluster development. There are a number of other parking screening standards and courtyard standards that I can quickly go over. So this is a graphic that depicts some of the courtyard design standards. You can see it's a minimum of 15 feet width that we have to require for the courtyard of a cottage cluster. And so that's, unfortunately, we can't require a larger courtyard necessarily, although we've received some direction that folks would like to do that. But that is what we're allowed to do according to the state. As you can see, there's a number of other provisions that apply to cottage cluster courtyards, including that they must, essentially have the cottages abut the courtyard. At least 50% of them must be facing the courtyard or within 10 feet of the courtyard. There's a number of different ways to ensure that they're oriented towards that common courtyard.
Is there a reason why it's 900 feet or less? Can we just say 900 feet? Because what if somebody wanted to put a 400 square foot cottage in and put 8 on a smaller lot?
We have thought about that quite a bit. We've heard pretty strongly that there's not much motivation for a developer to do that. When it comes to individual cottages constructing, the skin, I guess, of all these structures, it doesn't necessarily make sense for a developer to make smaller units and more of them, as opposed to maybe making a larger unit, or maybe different sizes of units that could accommodate different needs for housing. So we did discuss that. We did discuss with the Planning Commission the idea of a minimum footprint for a cottage. And again, the consensus was that there's really no need to do that, because there's no incentive for developers to construct these smaller units.
Well, but somebody could though, right? It's not necessarily
they could today, right? But yeah, a lot of people don't. And again, when you think about the cost of a kitchen, the cost of all the things that go into a dwelling unit itself, you're really gonna start thinking about a townhouse pretty quick after you get down to like an 800 square foot cottage cluster as something you're going to put on the market.
Right. But you're talking about the first floor. The lot coverage of 900 square feet on the first floor, so they could actually go up 3 stories.
No, it's a 2-story maximum building height.
Okay, 2 stories. Mm-hmm. So.
But there's also footprint, there's also square footage limitations that would prevent that as well. So we do have an R10 and R15 maximum square footage per cottage of 1,200 square feet, or it's an average, I guess. But so if you had 900 square feet on your primary living level on the bottom floor, you'd only have 300 additional square feet to use in your cottage.
Oh, okay. So there are limits. You can't.
1,200 square feet total. So if you used up the entire 900 on the bottoms, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Wynn. Oh, yeah, and then.
I just have a quick question. Is this image drawn to scale?
Yes.
Seriously? And that.
This is from the state's model code.
Of course it is.
Well, I'm just looking, it has a 15 minimum of their courtyard size, and if you kind of look at that, that means some of these houses are built at an extremely small footprint. So this is a very deceiving. I know we're stuck to what we have to do, but this is, I think, a very deceiving.
Well, it says 15-foot minimum. I don't think it's supposed to be 15 feet exactly on the image.
Exactly. I guess that's my point. Is I think this is very misleading, let's put it that way. And again, we're stuck with the minimums and so forth, but I just wanted to put that out there that this isn't, it makes it look like, oh, how wonderful and beautiful. And when it's done with a big courtyard, it really is, can be really great. But when you say 15 feet, I mean, yeah, City Manager Bennett and I are 20 feet apart. So it's just, I just wanted to point that out.
Could you play pickleball in that distance? Okay. Councilor White.
If you look on the drawing there on the structure that's A and B, where this is that 10 foot, that's 10 feet right there, right? And then to assume that then that 15 foot is the same. Anyways, that's not my point. Yeah. No, I was curious. So with these cottage clusters, and we're talking about developers building these stick-built homes, would there be a prohibition on like tiny homes, prefabricated structures?
You know, I'm not sure of what the typical size of a tiny house is, but I think they're fairly small compared to a cottage within a cottage cluster. But I'm not aware of anything that would prohibit, at least a prefab component of a building. But I don't think that you can wheel these things in and out of a cottage cluster and call them a cottage.
There are a couple of things to consider. So tiny homes are oftentimes they're not buildings, they're vehicles. And that's how they're permitted, that's how they're regulated. Mm-hmm. And we do not allow recreational vehicles or other, mobile dwellings to be placed on the lot. So there's that control on it. In terms of the size of these units, how small would one be able to build a stick-built home? It would have to comply with the building code, so there's certain minimum requirements for living space and for laboratories and everything that goes into a dwelling. And then I think as Planner Olson was saying earlier, there's economies of, at some point it's just not economical to do that. So we are, relying on that to some degree, but vehicles are not part of what's being considered.
We don't go down that slope of allowing all these shipping container houses that I've seen pop up in different.
Materials, the means and methods and materials are all regulated by the building code and our building design standards. So if you can find a way to use corrugated metal in your design and meet our standards and meet the building code, that's allowed. There's certain overlays and districts where, there are limits on the types of materials that you can use. So.
And I believe state law still preempts us from prohibiting manufactured dwellings. So if there was somebody out there who was making a home in a factory, I think we're still preempted from distinguishing between that and a single family in a stick-built home. So I will also say, however, they're getting a lot more creative and interesting, and I just don't think that's as big a worry as it used to be.
Are the system development charges for like per unit cottage cluster the same as per unit for a quadplex townhome? Or are they all different?
I think it's all different. It would have to sort of depend on the project and all the specifics of the project, the size of the units, and
okay.
Yeah, until we make any changes to the system development charge schedule of fees, those would be, I believe they'd be regulated or charged, and the city engineer could correct me if I'm wrong, but they are single-family dwellings. They're, detached single-family dwellings. Accessory dwelling units have a fee that is different than a single-family dwelling because they're limited to 800 square feet. And I think that, I'm trying to remember if it's comparable to a duplex or not, but in any event, cottage clusters would have one set of fees. Multiplexes would have a fee that's, I think it would be the same as how we assess multifamily development.
Okay.
If that answers your
question. Is that something we still have to we still need to do?
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
Well, and from that standpoint, if say you had 4 houses that were single family and they all got converted to fourplexes. So now we have, from 4 families, we now have 16 families that are living in the same space.
Yeah, that conversion, that building permit for the conversion would trigger the assessment of SDCs. And so going from 1 unit to 2 units in a duplex, we would collect the fee for for the additional unit that is half of the duplex. If we're going from one unit to a fourplex, then the same principle would apply.
And so if we don't have enough capacity in the water or the sewer at that point in time, because you've increased the
Eric, do you want to
usage,
talk about?
how does, I mean, is the city on the hook now for, let's just say that SDC charges are 10 and it costs us 25 to do the improvements to have adequate services, then we pay the 15.
Well,
Is that right?
yeah, either the builder or the developer would provide the improvements that are necessary to serve the development, or their permit would be denied. I mean, that's really the scenario.
Okay, so we're covered on that.
Yes. Yeah, that's the fundamental sort of concept that was established with infrastructure was, if the developer wants to provide it, if it doesn't exist and the developer wants to provide it, we should not preclude them, or we can't preclude them according to the state. But if they can't provide the infrastructure, then we can, deny a building permit.
Oh, okay.
The city is not on the hook, in other words, for the infrastructure, I guess, is the easiest way to say it. All right, so moving on to just talking quickly about the cottage cluster parking design standards here. Essentially what this does is requires parking within a cottage cluster to be clustered in clusters of up to 5 spaces that are separated by landscaping. So you can see it needs to be screened. There are a number of other sort of standards that apply to parking design in cottage clusters here as well. Again, this is taken from the model code, and I'm guessing where it says 20-foot minimum there on the bottom left, that's a little bit more than 20 feet. I'm guessing this is similarly not to scale, but again, that's a minimum, so I guess it is technically to scale. Just misleading, perhaps. All right, and so the proposed code amendments that we have for your consideration today also would apply a maximum floor area requirement, as we discussed a moment ago, as I mentioned to Councilor Wendland, I believe, to individual cottages within a cottage cluster. So while we can't apply a maximum square footage to a cottage cluster project, we can apply square footage maximum to individual cottages. So our proposal is that for essentially an R75 and below, we would require a maximum average floor area for the cottage clusters of 1,000 square feet. So that means that on average, the cottage clusters could have no more than 1,000 square feet, average floor area. That means some could be bigger, some could be smaller, but it would have to sort of land somewhere under 1,000 square feet on average. We propose to go up to 1,200 square feet per cottage for R10 and R15. The reason that we opted to do this was based on Planning Commission direction to essentially ensure, as best as we can really, that the combined floor area of the cottages would add up to roughly the same floor area that is allowed for a quadplex, triplex, duplex, single family, et cetera. So that's kind of the rationale here. So when you're talking about 5 to 8 cottages, at that size, you do start getting into comparable square footage for, again, comparing this to what you can construct for single family through a quadplex. All right, and with respect to parking, this is perhaps one of the most rigid components of the bill. A minimum of 1 parking space per dwelling unit is what we propose because there is a requirement from the state under Division 46 that we are not allowed to essentially require any more than that. So this is actually pretty similar to what we do currently for duplexes. It's the exact same that we do for duplexes in single family. There would be nothing preventing developers from providing more parking on their property if they chose to do so. There'd be no cap, so the market can continue to provide those spaces if there was a demand. And so the parking space dimension standards, et cetera, are also proposed to be the same for single family as for middle housing. So a lot of those technical details are included in the amendments too. So this is another component where we really didn't have much discretion as well. So essentially, we had to make some changes to our access lane and flag lot standards to comply with the bill. For the most part, these regulations are going to remain the same as they are currently, though we will have to allow, similar to other elements of the bill, we'll have to allow duplexes on all lots where single family is currently permitted. So for the most part, we have to allow that within our access lane and flag lot standards. We had to make some modifications to allow essentially, duplexes to be allowed on flag lots. So we had a limitation on the number of lots that could be served by a flag lot that we had to modify a bit in order to comply here.
Yes, Councilor Mans.
So now that we can put duplexes on the flag lot, are we going to end up with this private driveway or private lane situation that we've had in the past with regards to flag lots? And is there any way of requiring connectivity to the general neighborhood if they're in the middle of a neighborhood, say, for example?
We do have some street connectivity standards that will continue to apply. Unfortunately, the answer is there could be up to 3 lots on a flag lot. So you could see, more than the sort of 3 lot maximum for single family today. Of course, you can build an ADU if you theoretically wanted to.
But does it become a private drive, I guess, or a private street, if you will? Because if you have 6 units on it, unlike regular duplexes, which would be forward-facing on a public street that people would walk by, this becomes a private driveway or a private lane or...
Yeah, it would be what we call an access lane still. It would just serve more units than an access lane does today. So, I'm not sure we'd call it technically a private street necessarily, but it's the engineering department cares about these classifications, so I'm not trying to be...
I know, I'm sorry.
I'm not trying to be pedantic here.
I'm going back in the day here. Okay. Thank you.
But the concept is, we have to basically treat duplexes the same as single family, and currently we do allow access lanes to basically act as an exception to requiring street frontage for a given lot. So because we provide that exception, if you will, to single family, we have to provide it for duplexes. So that's kind of we had some back and forth with DLCD on this, and I think that's kind of where we landed. Scott has more to say.
I don't want to keep jumping up here, but I remember the access lane discussion. The code used to allow 8 dwellings or 8 lots off of an access lane. And today it allows 3 with, I think, 2 flag lots that are served by the lane. So if I'm understanding this correctly, under this new code for middle housing, if we're allowing a duplex on each of the lots that is served by the access lane, then we could see, 2 plus 2, so 4 units that are served directly from that lane. It could be that the lot that is on the street is also served by that lane, but it would have the opportunity to receive access from the street as well. So
in the way that our code is currently
there
written.
could be a total of 6 dwellings that would receive access from the access lane, or it could be that there are only those 2 times 2 on the back. But we're not going back to 8, is what I'm trying to...
No, I totally appreciate that. You know what my paranoia is about this. Thank you.
Right. Which is the code?
Well, the code allows for 3 lots, but you can build duplexes on those lots.
Oh, okay.
It's not the same as units.
Okay.
All right, and I guess just one other clarification here is that, the on-lane parking spaces that we require currently on a flag lot must also be allowed to count towards your parking requirements. So that's another clarification that we got from DLCD. The way we had interpreted it right now has been sort of an additional guest space, more or less, that would be provided on the access lane. So we're no longer able to, more or less require 2 spaces for a flag lot. So generally speaking, impervious surface limitations and a number of other sort of components of neighborhood overlays will continue to apply under the proposed code amendments. We had a number of amendments taking care of sort of technical components within here, but or within some overlay districts. But for the most part, impervious surface limitations that are contained within districts like the Uplands R10 overlay district and the Glen Murray R15 or Lake Grove R75 R10 would continue to apply, though. Again, cottage clusters are kind of a unique beast here. So cottage clusters have an impervious surface standard that would apply to the common courtyard, but the sort of general impervious surface limitation would not apply. Another sort of thing we had to look at within some of the overlay districts were standards related to the number of dwelling units that sort of scaled by the number of dwelling units. We looked at those with Cascadia in our audit that we conducted and found that the front entry design standards in a few zones, or the front porch design standards in the R6 and the front entry in the RDD, had to be modified to no longer scale by the number of dwelling units. So we essentially are proposing some changes to those requirements within the sort of overlays based on public input that we received specifically. So I think one thing I would just mention, not only did we change this to no longer scale by the number of dwelling units in the R6 zone, but it's a fairly complicated code when it comes to the front porch standard. So we had to really make sure that we weren't inadvertently sort of allowing for things that we weren't intending to be allowed for. So we worked with Carol on some of that language and were able to land at some R6 front porch design standard language that I think hopefully not only achieves the goals of our current sort of exercise to comply with House Bill 2001, but also I think more directly addresses some of the first edition neighborhood sort of goals that were intended to be in those front porch design standards originally. So hopefully we're resulting in a good product there. So we can talk a little bit more about the specifics when it comes to that, but more or less we just wanted to ensure that in the R6 zone, there would still continue to be front porch required to be facing narrow streets, specifically not the sort of lettered avenues, but for the numbered streets. And so you'll see that we did talk a little bit with the Planning Commission about those specifics and landed on some proposed language that we've presented to you in the packet. So Division 46 also allows the city to prohibit or limit middle housing in certain areas that are protected under statewide planning goals. So that includes regulations that we've already implemented here in the city to maintain goal protected resources like the Greenway Management Overlay District, the Sensitive Lands Overlay District, the Flood Management Area, Hillside Protection Areas, and Historic Preservation Areas. So generally all those portions of our code already complied with Division 46, but we did have to make some minor changes to the Resource Protection District, essentially to extend the same allowances that we currently have for single-family development to duplexes. Again, duplexes need to be treated basically the same as single-family housing. So what we had to do within the Sensitive Lands Overlay District was essentially allow for the construction of a duplex, similar to how we would allow for a single-family home on a fully encumbered site, as well as extend density transfer provisions that are allowed for single-family to duplexes. All right, and so, that covers the proposed code amendments. I have other component of the presentation, but I figured this might be a good time to stop and ask if there are any questions on the last few slides before I get into the final portion of the presentation.
I have
Councilor Mans.
Going back to that very first slide where you were talking about dividing or ministerial lot line adjustments, I think that was in the very beginning. If it's not in an overlay district or it's not an R6, I'm trying to figure out, would it just be a straight up ministerial lot line adjustment if it is in fact a duplex or a triplex? Follow what I'm asking maybe?
I'm not sure I follow. So you're talking about a lot line adjustment in particular?
Like if you have a 10,000 square foot lot and you would need to divide it, correct?
Oh, a partition.
Or
Yeah.
a partitioning, thank you, I couldn't remember the word. So would that just be a ministerial? In other words, would it be handled in-house as part of?
That is a good question. That was going to be in the sort of additional
Okay, then
section,
never mind.
but
Never
I'm
mind.
happy to address it.
No, you can.
I think it's important to point out that a lot division or partition would continue to be a minor development under our proposal, but you could construct a quadplex, for instance, without the need for a partition on a single-family lot.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So if you want to actually formally divide the lots, you'd still have to go through a minor development procedure.
Okay. The second question I had was orientation of the, let's say duplex or triplex on a corner lot. Is there any regulation around that outside of, say, First Edition that has a special porch?
We haven't proposed any specifics in terms of the orientation of like a front entry or something on a duplex, and requiring that they, I'm fairly certain that the minimum compliance provisions wouldn't allow us to require that they face different streets necessarily. So we don't have a ton of flexibility there, but there were some, there was a lot of discussion about that, I guess, at the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee. And I think folks thought that it would be best to apply the existing standards that we have currently for single family to middle housing. I don't know if you have more to add on that, Bill. So we did discuss that, but we're limited in our options under Division 46 and didn't receive much of a consensus to explore it further.
Okay. And then finally, jumping back really quickly, where you have a situation where you have legal lots of record, such as you do in Hallinan Heights, where you have these 5,000 platted square foot lots. If someone wanted to do 2 sets of duplexes on those, would they still need to, they'd have to partition but one portion, or they'd have to go through? Okay, so they wouldn't have to partition, but they'd have to do a ministerial lot line adjustment. On the legal lots of record?
No, you don't have to divide a lot to build a duplex. You just build a duplex.
But
And if you want to
asking-
offer them for sale, then you condoize them.
Well, no, that isn't what I'm asking.
Yes, they could build 4 units on those substandard
Okay,
lots.
but this is like a,
We have to allow duplexes on
understand
those, but they wouldn't require a partition. But yeah.
okay. I'll take it offline because I
Oh,
think it's more complex and maybe I'm not explaining it well enough.
We can circle back to it too.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer the question. Yeah, I was just trying to clarify, I guess, for a substandard lot, technically, we would have to allow a duplex if it was under the minimum lot size of the zone, but we wouldn't actually have to allow a triplex or a quadplex on that lot.
But
Minimum lot size, though, Eric, and you're going to say this more eloquently than I am. Minimum lot size really only applies if you're doing a land division. All over town, we probably have lots in, say, R10 or R15 zones that are actually smaller than that. You just can't divide them.
Right.
So
but I'm
that's, I think that we get mixed up in terms of, because if you have a legal lot in a residential zone, you can build a house on it. So if you have a legal
Right, but
lot.
you have to ministerially separate in Hallinan, don't you?
No, they're
Because
legal
that's
lots
what-
already, and sometimes what you have is I see what you're saying. You have these neighborhoods like Hallinan where they have these pre-platted.
Right, so it's
Somebody
2
has built a house on
lots
2
of
lots.
record.
That's the question, I think.
Oh, I see.
Is
No, it's 2 5,000 square foot platted lots that needed to be ministerially adjusted. Let's say, for example, you had a 10,000 square foot lot, it was ministerially adjusted. They built 1 home on 1 lot and 1 home on the other lot.
Right.
Right, but you
A
had to
non-conforming
still
lot
go
of
through
record
the
or
process of ministerially adjusting those lot lines.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to adjust lot lines, we're not
You would
changing the
have to.
process for that,
If
right?
you were going to do,
No, those lots already exist. I think that's the point. And actually, one of the projects that you guys are getting lots of comments about some tree cutting in First Edition. The lots already exist, even though they only built one house on it. And that's the problem, is there's not actually, I mean, there may be a ministerial act where the homeowner has to go down to the county and say, now it's 2 lots, we're gonna sell them separately. But those lots already exist. There's no action for the planning department, which is what I'm trying to say.
Well, but it's a legal, a ministerial lot line adjustment, no?
It's not a lot line adjustment. They're 2 pre-existing legal lots already.
Okay.
But in some cases, there's
We handled it.
lot line
I
adjustment.
Yeah, but the owner would go straight to the county just
Right.
to, they wouldn't, it's not an action of the city to recognize those lots. They're, right, it's not, those lots already exist. That's actually part of the controversy over those lots, right? Is that you actually do have the right to build 2 homes if you have 2
Right,
lots.
you do have the right, but
Even though prior owners might have only built 1 home.
Right, I understand that. But in the past, there was no code around having to do a ministerial lot line adjustment on these sort of lots?
For a historical lot of record, as we're talking about.
I might be able to help here. So where we've had a block with a combination of lot, substandard, and standard.
Right.
We have seen applicants do lot line adjustments through the city.
Right.
Through the city's ministerial lot line adjustment process in order to aggregate enough space on what were the most substandard, the smallest of the lots, to give them more space without taking any of the other lots out of conformance. And so that kind of ministerial lot line adjustment
Would
process.
still hold.
That still holds, and
Okay,
one could do
that's all I
that.
wanted to
Because if
know.
you have a 25 or a 15-foot wide sliver of a lot, and you have a 6,000 square foot lot, or a 7,000, 8,000 square foot lot, you're gonna do that adjustment so that you have 2 buildable lots. Even though they're 2 legal lots, you may need to do that adjustment to make them buildable.
Okay, thank you. That's really all I wanted to know.
Great, thank you. Councilor Verdict.
Thank you. This goes back to kind of the front porch and the definition. Why is it only on the narrow street frontage that you have kind of the restrictions of keeping it open?
Well, we only require the porch on the narrow street lot, or on the narrow street frontage, rather, yeah.
Okay, so it's not required on the other streets, so that's why it's, okay. Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay.
Any other questions, or shall I proceed? All right.
Is this one like twice as long as the previous one?
Yeah, that's gonna be the main event here. Almost done, just 5 slides, I think, left here, so. So as we've touched upon a bit, when it comes to expedited middle housing land divisions, I guess we haven't actually touched upon this specifically today, but we have touched upon this in previous council study sessions. And, we are subject to the requirements of Senate Bill 458, which means that the city has to allow what they call expedited land divisions to facilitate middle housing, basically to enable each middle housing unit to be individually bought and sold. So again, the parent lot would really need to comply with all of the applicable standards for whatever the middle housing type is that we're discussing here. So you'd have to comply with all the setback requirements, floor area, et cetera, prior to this expedited division. Of course, the structures would have to comply with all relevant building code requirements, and they would have to provide separate utilities for each resulting lot. And easements for utilities, common areas, parking, driveways, et cetera. So the way this works, is similar to the way that the existing process that the state has for expedited land divisions today. It's within a section of the Oregon administrative rules, and currently we don't have, there is an existing non-middle housing expedited land division process that's available. We don't reference it in our code today, and we've been given direction from the Planning Commission to essentially continue to be, I guess, quote unquote, silent on this, but to, of course, comply and just kind of refer directly to the OAR when we do have applications. So we are going to be prepared to, of course, process and administer these types of applications, but our proposal does not include them within the code amendments. As we did touch upon earlier, public improvement standards are also going to be impacted by this proposal, and currently we're working on essentially ministerial public improvement standards, so clear and objective way to determine the amount of public improvements that are required for different types of middle housing. So something that we're wanting to do again, because it is a pretty big jump from the minor development process, which allows the city to impose conditions upon development to ensure that public improvements are provided. We're going to incorporate that into our ministerial process, more or less, which we are allowed to do under the state regulations. So again, this is fairly different. This would be newly applicable process, and it's something that currently the city attorney's office and the engineering department are working to develop on a fairly expedited scale. When it comes to other recommendations that we received from the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee related to preservation, that work is moving forward on a parallel process, and I'm sure that you're more familiar with the update on where this is at than I am even, but the city is obviously currently working to review the definition of demolition in the building code to better address significant structural removal, and we're looking into policies related to non-conforming development as well. One of the biggest components of my own personal workload for the coming years is going to be House Bill 2003, which will actually allow us to pursue some concepts that were developed by the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee related to affordability and accessibility in the coming years. So really, we've heard a lot of criticism that, while House Bill 2001 has been touted as a, legislation that would produce affordable housing, or, that's at least relatively affordable, we've heard, obviously criticism that in Lake Oswego we might not necessarily see affordable units being constructed, even if they are relatively, less expensive than single family. So we did hear a lot from the advisory committee that, we need to look at different ways to promote and incentivize affordability for middle housing units specifically. And we also heard a lot that we need to look at ways to incentivize creating accessible middle housing units as well. So we will have a lot of opportunities to examine different strategies to do that in our work in the coming years related to the housing needs analysis and housing production strategy, which is required under House Bill 2003. So more on that to come, lots more discussion and outreach related to that in the coming years that will be required under the state. So with that, I will end my presentation and open it up to more questions.
Okay, Councilor Boo, question.
Yeah, it's where you ended, because House Bill 2001 objective in Lake Oswego, that's mainly where I do not think that the objective for the city council would be to have affordable housing. And we say affordable housing, housing that is accessible for many of our employees, of the folks that are working in here but cannot afford to live here. Do you think that with having all these possibilities of like having 8 units in one thing would help the accessibility? When I say accessibility, I mean the affordability of those homes.
Just middle housing broadly, you think? You're asking whether you
because
can go?
The reason I'm saying that, I was in a presentation of some housing folks during the pandemic. The guy was saying like that he won't sell, for example, in it was a quadplex or a duplex, less than $800,000, which I mean, then what's the point of doing then all this if it's just to have more housing and more expensive? So I have a problem with it, and I hope, we won't go that route, because like density, having more houses that are more expensive does not make sense in the change of the character of our neighborhoods and all that, but it doesn't bring anything to the people of Lake Oswego. That's my fear, and I hope it's not gonna go that direction?
Well, as I mentioned, we did hear other folks that had similar concerns, and we did, with the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee, talk about specific ways to incentivize middle housing units to be affordable, or, technically affordable, quote unquote affordable according to federal programs. So, I think we do offer different SDC waivers or different types of incentives of varying different varieties for multifamily housing. So I think the idea would be to potentially extend that to middle housing if there is enough concern about that. So that's at least one idea that came out of the advisory committee over the summer. And it is something that we're going to be required to address under House Bill 2003, thinking of ways, different sort of strategies and different ways that the city could approach the affordable housing problem, and different strategies that make sense for the city of Lake Oswego specifically.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Winland. Yeah.
Oh. I guess this is the 30,000-foot level. I haven't read through all the Planning Commission meeting notes and all that stuff, but would you say that we're aligned pretty well with what the Planning Commission, what we talked about when we had our meeting, and then you went to the Planning Commission? Do you think pretty much we're aligned with what the overall goals are between our direction and what you did? Because I have to say thank you very much. First of all, thanks for all this work. Talk about a complex, four-dimensional puzzle that you guys work on. It's incredible. Everyone thinks that we just have square lots and it's one thing applies. We have so many variabilities in any town, I'm sure, like Oswego especially. There's just so many nuances that you have to look at, and you covered it very well in a short amount of time with 2 years worth of work. So I really appreciate that. I hope you sleep and don't dream of this stuff is really what I hope, but maybe after a glass of wine or something. But are we pretty well aligned with where the Planning Commission, where we kind of felt the feedback from council, and then I'm assuming we're going to comply with the state mandates. So do you, overall, in a big picture?
I certainly hope so. That was our intent. We really have been talking about this with the Planning Commission and folks in the community for a long time, and I think we were able to benefit from having a lot of those conceptual discussions earlier on, so that when we did produce the code amendments and the Planning Commission looked at them, they were pleased with where they had landed, and they had reflected everything that we had discussed previously. And further than that, I think we were able to accommodate some additional concerns from the Planning Commission, sort of throughout the process of discussing the recommendations. So we have been as responsive as possible to their input and to your input, of course, and we certainly hope we've landed in a sort of happy landing place, I guess, if you will, between the minimum compliance and what we're required to do, the areas where we didn't have much control and the areas where we did, and to try to tailor those the elements where we did have more control as best as possible to the city. So I think I certainly, it's up to you to make that determination, of course, but I certainly hope that's where we landed, and that's what we intended to do throughout every step of the process. So.
Okay. Right, and do you feel that at this point we're at a point to where, we've been dealing with this. I think when people now go out and developers and whatever, this is going to be a brand new topic, and when somebody builds a duplex or a triplex next door to them, 5 years from now, they're going to find out that we changed all kinds of things and they had they didn't know about it. Do you think we're covered pretty much on what we need to deal with, or do you think we have a lot of work ahead of us still?
I think there is a lot of work in terms of communication at the planning counter, and for instance, that's going to be, it is a very big change to our development code, and there's going to be a lot of new things for folks to learn and be able to explain new handouts to use at the planning counter, new ways to communicate with applicants. So by no means are we through with this work. There's going to be, I think, a lot of the way that this is implemented will be highly dependent on, how well we can communicate this to folks that come in and just ask us questions at the counter. So, really what we're wanting to do right now is, we've created a website that'll sort of act as a repository and just have general information on things so that folks can see. But just creating new handouts, revising all of our existing handouts within development review, pre-app notes, things of that nature, just to make sure that folks are able to start talking about this the second that it's in our code. So I think, when it comes to the design outcomes, I think we're in as good of a place as we could be, but it'll just be, it'll be a change for the way that we administer and process applications internally. So I think that's a lot of the continuing work just will be that administration.
So last question, when all this is said and done, is I guess we've gone through and we've tailorized it and put it into Lake Oswego as much as we can after all this, because we could have just taken the pre-programmed state thing and implement it. Was it worth the effort and the 2 years of work to, are we different enough to where we feel that it's a good product that we've created for our citizens?
Please.
I'll let you answer. The fact that you have one person here at your public hearing adopting this code to testify is, I think, a testament to that it has been worth it, because I think if you just tried to enact the state code, you would have a room full of very angry citizens. So, and to your point earlier, it's a credit to the planning staff, to Eric, to Scott, to all the folks that they've worked with in the collaborative way that they've done this project. So leaving aside the substance, I think that the level of effort has definitely produced a code where the folks who really are the most passionate about these issues feel that they've been heard.
Good.
Yeah, I think the difference between the model code and where we landed is vast. I think we'll be able to maintain a lot of the existing regulations that we have in residential areas throughout the city with this. So, I think there's that component, and obviously with the amount of outreach and the amount of communication and just sort of interactions with community members, I think that's really been helpful. And it was good that we had that earlier on in the process. And, hopefully we won't have an angry single commenter later tonight. So.
Is that a hint? Thank you very much. Thanks, Eric.
Okay. Well, hold on, we have the hearing. So now we're going to open the public hearing. Yes.
Have testimony.
Ms. Ockert, please come forward. Good evening. Thank you for being the one person here.
I appreciate that. Carol Ockert, and speaking as the land use liaison with Fan Forest Hills this evening. And an unusual evening, unusual for me too. I chose not to come here with a 10-minute prepared speech because as we're wrapping this up, I wanted to talk with you instead of testify at you. I think that the city manager captured it well and said that absolutely it has been the outreach and the collaborative process and the fact that though we are going through an overlay of the code in general as we talk tonight, know that the minutia has been talked through in detail on almost every single one of these items. So we have turned it around, we have looked at it, we have disagreed, we have done everything we can to vet it as thoroughly as we can. And I say we because you guys know I talk to my board, I talk to the neighborhood chairs, they all go back and talk to their boards. A lot of us then call Eric and talk to Eric. And so this process has gone on for at least a year and a half in that kind of passion. Because we live in a city where a lot of people have a lot of things to say because we care and we love living here. And I think that's super important. And I think it started with you guys when this concept first came up to council. And you're trying to get your head around it and you're trying to figure out what can we do, what can't we do, and you opened it up for a process where we were all able to actually participate in it. And you got us help. You got us help by giving us a really excellent group of consultants from Cascadia Partners who worked through this. They were a great resource. As we ended up with questions as we were coming along, I was able to go to Eric. People were able to talk to them in meetings. We actually got substantive answers on things in real time when we needed them to make decisions. The Planning Commission was on this. They rose to the occasion and also asked the questions. They looked at the details, and they made some modifications from the Middle Housing Committee recommendations, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's the process going forward. You guys did too. So I appreciate all of that. Mr. Siegel here was really good at moving the process flow forward. I can be persistent. Eric was patient. Every time I persisted, he patiently responded. If he didn't know an answer I needed, he went and got it. You know, it was something to come back to you this evening and tell you it's been good. And the community really did participate in the surveys, in the discussions, in the online Zooms that Eric put together with Cascadia. I want to have that opportunity to talk to you about that this evening and say so. So thank you. Seriously, that's really sincere from me to you guys. We're going to see in another step next what the builders do when they start to design with this code. We don't really know yet. I think they'll surprise us in good ways, actually. I think they'll be creative with it. I think we've given them some puzzles that they probably would rather not have had, but that's for us to do and them to design around it. So I'm looking forward to that. With the discussion that came up here again this evening, looking at the cottage clusters, which are a different animal than the rest of what we've been doing, I would say that the one thing that's still on the table, if you guys want to pick it up this evening, is the piece that says, set a minimum footprint for a cottage if you want to, or have a discussion after I go and sit down about what the advantages or disadvantages would be. So we're already telling them they have to build a minimum of 5, but they can't build more than 8. And determining a minimum footprint is going to determine, will they build 5, 6, 7, or 8 in there? If you tell them they have to build a larger footprint, well, maybe they won't build as many. So I don't know what you as a group want. I'm not telling you which way to go, but I think it's actually the one thing that I would tell you we didn't pick up off the table that we can if we want to. Other than that, we dug in deep and we picked up all of the kinds of items that the state would allow us to work through. I want to mention the R6 code in the front porches and the alleys because, again, I would say staff was really willing to find that extra oomph of energy at the end of this really long process to do something that was really fine-tuning into a neighborhood where we have a really specific design template. So I appreciate that Eric and I worked together to come up with something that I think will carry us through as we are with that particular R6 zone. And so my summation here is it has been absolutely positively worth the approach that we've taken and the route that you guys as a city council sent us down. So thank you to all of you for doing that, and that's sincere. So I actually still have time left, but I don't need it. I've actually said all I hope to say, and if I have any more that I can answer, just let me know. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Acker. Okay. Don't think we have any other testimony?
No, Mayor.
Okay, we'll close that public hearing. Would someone like to
Move to tentatively approve Ordinance 2892 and direct staff to return on June 7, 2022 with a final version of the ordinance, including findings and conclusion for LU 220007.
Second.
All right, discussion. Counselor Mans. Oh,
That's a mistake. Oh, go on.
any discussion? All right, let's call the roll.
Mayor Buck,
Yes.
Councilors Winland,
Yes.
Wynn,
Yes.
Burdick,
Yes.
Rapp, Mans,
Yes.
and Boot.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Olson.
Mr. Olson.
Big multi-year. And thank you all the neighbors all that participated on all these various committees that we put together, came before the planning commission. It's been, yeah, a big years long, one of our biggest planning efforts probably we've ever undertaken. So good job. Thank you, Director, Planner. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a brief 5-minute recess and we'll be right back.
On to 2003. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, so we're back in order. We're going to, I just want to check with you all, colleagues, if you're okay if we modify the agenda a little bit tonight and move item 7.2, funding for pathway projects, and item 7.3, Boones Ferry Road development solicitation, both to the special meeting that we're having next week. Instead of tonight? Okay. And then, does that work? Okay, so we're going to do that. And then we're going to just take things a little bit out of order here, but don't go anywhere. And we're going to move to the consent agenda first and then come back to the ADA presentations. Would someone like to?
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Councilor Rapp. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Motion passes 7-0. With that, we will go into our study session of this evening, which is the ADA self-evaluation and transition plan update. And joining us is the ADA coordinator, Kelly Bird, and our city engineer, Erica Rooney. Thank you both.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. I am actually very happy to finally be here. This has been a long time coming, right? It's been many years in the making for us to get to this point. Maybe you'll remember we actually started the process with a consultant to help us put together a transition plan right before COVID. We had one meeting the week of the world shut down, and that put kind of a damper on our progress. But nonetheless, we have made a lot of progress, and in particular, thanks to your approval last year in the fiscal year 21-22 budget process, we were able to acquire a new position, our ADA coordinator. And I'm very happy tonight to have with us Kelly Bird, who started with us at the end of last year. So in the last few months, she hasn't even been here 6 months yet, working on it right about that time. She has done a lot to bring our plan up to almost complete, and we are starting to put together quite the strategy for moving forward. This is not a one-time event. This is a long-term commitment to ensuring that our facilities are accessible to all, and that we're ADA compliant with the work that we do and the facilities that we provide. So I'm not going to speak anymore. This is Kelly's presentation. I'm here to support or provide any historical perspective, but without any further ado, this evening is Kelly Bird, our ADA coordinator.
Thank you, Erica. I appreciate that. Good evening, Mayor Buck and councilors. I'm Kelly Bird, as Erica mentioned, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am the new ADA coordinator. I started in November. So I'm really excited to be here and to give you all an update on our progress. I'm just going to give a little background about the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's our civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on a disability, and it guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities in life as others do. And in this slide, you can see a picture of a dog or service animal who's helping someone walk across the street. The ADA also guarantees enjoyment for employment opportunities to purchase goods and services, and then it also talks about people with disabilities being able to benefit from state and local governments in their programs, services, and activities. The ADA does require that public entities like the City of Lake Oswego, we do a self-evaluation, and that will review all of our programs and services and identify any barriers in our programs and activities that prevents people with disabilities from accessing things. The ADA self-evaluation also identifies the barriers and activities that prevents persons with disabilities from access. And the main key is that we are providing an equal access to the maximum extent feasible. So that's really key, to the maximum extent feasible. So the end result of the self-evaluation is that we'll have an inventory of all of our facilities where structural modifications are needed to our facilities to make them accessible for people with disabilities. The self-evaluation also is the foundation for the transition plan, and then we need to keep our self-evaluation on file and available for public inspection for at least 3 years of the data completion. So for public entities that have more than 50 employees, they're also required to do a transition plan. And a transition plan, it sets forth the steps necessary to bring all the facilities or programs and activities into compliance. So it also provides, the really important thing is that it provides a schedule for completion of the modifications. And then it's really important that in our plans that we're including people with disabilities in the preparations of our plans. So as Erica mentioned, our transition plan, it's a living document. And as we grow and we gain more facilities, we'll have to look at those and they'll have to be incorporated into the self-evaluation and transition plan process. But these are all like a framework that we're using for continuous process and for continuous improvement of the city's program, services, and facilities. So as Erica mentioned, way back in January of 2020, the council approved a contract for us to work with MIG, a consulting firm, to develop our self-evaluation and transition plan. So the city initiated this in spring of 2020, but however, as a result of the pandemic, the project has deviated from the original time estimates. But the project is about 90% complete. So I'm just gonna talk really briefly about some of the phases. So phase 1 started in January 2020. Phase 2, where MIG reviewed all of our policies and did an evaluation. They surveyed staff, they did a comprehensive review of our city policies, service, and practice, and they conducted to make sure that none of the things that we're doing is discriminatory towards people with disabilities. The major projects were all tasks in this phase were completed in winter of 2020. So phase 3 is where they came out and looked at our buildings, our parking structures, and our park facilities, and they were evaluated. And they documented all the barriers to accessibility within the city buildings, parking structures, and facilities. This all took place in the spring of 2021, and the barrier assessments were submitted to the city in the summer of 2021. And then phase 4, they did the right-of-way evaluations, where they looked at our sidewalks, our curbs, our all that stuff in the right-of-way, more stuff that I knew that we had. But they did all that in winter of 2020, and right now they're preparing the transition plan. I attached all the documents to the report, so hopefully you guys were all able to see the details. I'm gonna show some pictures of some of the things that we've done to make changes. Here in council chambers, when I first started, we weren't really using the assisted listening that's available. This room is wired for sound, which is really awesome. So if people who have hearing impairments, they can be mic'd in and they can hear. So so those are available. We have about 8 listening devices. So if folks have hearing issues, they can get those. I actually used one during a meeting. It was very, very helpful for me. So, and also the Adult Community Center that was just remodeled. It's looped for sound too. So that's really great. We also have contracts in place now with vendors who can do effective communication, like ASL. We had an ASL interpreter today. It was really awesome to see that. It was really cool. So we have all those contracts in place now. So if someone comes and they need assistance, we can provide that support. Here's an image of Rossman Park right down the street. And you can see there's a picnic table, but there's no path. So this was identified as a barrier. someone in a wheelchair could not actually access or would have a difficult time getting to that picnic table. So that's something that we need to fix. Here's Stevens Meadow that was discussed today. There's some ADA issues with the gravel. It makes it very difficult for people with mobility devices to actually be able to use this park. Here's a sidewalk in the city that has some serious tripping hazards. This needs to be corrected. Here's a sidewalk that has steps, but what if you're in a wheelchair? How are you gonna get down there or get up? You'd have to, go around into the street. So we need to get that corrected. And then here's an example of something that was identified. Yeah, okay, as Martha said, there's so many things wrong, but the one thing that I was like, what if you had a cane and you just, So these are all need to be fixed. Okay.
Erica, you weren't here when that was
No,
decided.
that would never do that.
Right.
Never. It was before I was born.
Right, yeah, right.
Okay. So, like I said, a part of the process is that we need to have people with disabilities be a part of the process in our plans. We had a stakeholder advisory group was formed in the spring of 2020, and it includes people with disabilities or representatives of people with disabilities, and they provided input to our plans at our meeting on March 15th. This is some of the feedback they gave us. I gave all of it to you all in my report, but some of it was build, improve, and maintain pedestrian routes in the public right-of-way, budget and address ADA concerns in a timely manner, improve ADA access to all parks, including the natural ones. Park descriptions on websites should include the park address, accessible features, and if is public transit access. So like I said earlier, MIG is currently drafting our preliminary ADA self-evaluation and transition plan for public review. The plan is going to be posted on the city's website, and hard copies will be available for distribution. We're going to have a public comment period where I'm anticipating that it will come up in the summer. We'll have public comment period, and then come back for adoption of the plan. I talked a lot. I mean, I'm kind of trying to go fast because I know everybody's got things to do, but these changes to improve it's going to have a financial impact, and the impact is going to be significant, especially for some of the things that need to be done in the right-of-way and in some of our facilities. So with the final plan, we'll provide the recommendation for implementing these improvements over time. The next capital improvement plan, which will be revised for the next biennium in fiscal year 23 through 25, should incorporate the ADA transition plan timelines and costs, so the funds can be dedicated to this effort on a continual basis for the foreseeable future until such time as all the barriers are removed. So the next steps would be public review and comment period for the transition plan. Again, that should be in this summer. Hopefully the transition plan will be complete this summer, and then I'll return to council for final review and adoption in the fall. And then we'll integrate the ADA improvements into the next budget cycle, which will be in the fall and the winter. So that's my presentations. What questions do you have for me?
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I found the report very enlightening, and just appreciate the thinking about the stakeholder groups that you put together and bringing these different perspectives, because so many of the things, you see, you go, oh yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, but I personally wouldn't have thought of it otherwise. So just appreciate how those groups have kind of informed this process. We had some of the folks come to public comment earlier who mentioned they were a part of that process, obviously contributing their, would appear to be their lived experience to that, so critical. So I was wondering, my first question is how you kind of put together the stakeholder groups, and what is the involvement kind of going forward, and how did you find different types of accessibility perspectives to,
The stakeholder group, I had some of the people who were in the group were recommendations from city staff. And then I did do a little bit of looking around. Okay, I was trying to find people with disabilities that actually live in the city or companies. So I did put out letters to different businesses to see if they would be interested in being in our group. I didn't hear back from a lot of those folks, but we did get 6 community members to participate. One particular person, their husband is someone who's in a wheelchair, and they travel along Boone's Ferry Road. So that was really good that we got their perspective.
Right.
And but I know that came up in the public comment that they would want more people, and I'm totally open to that. I just had a hard time finding folks. So if there's anybody that wants to be a part of the group, I'm not sure if we're going to actually meet again in this process, because we're going to open up the process to the public as a whole. But I'm open to suggestions.
Well, I know there's a group of parents, and they have students with disabilities, and they're very engaged. And if not for this, but also just for our other efforts around this broader topic of accessibility, they're a very good group. And even then, the perspectives of the parents really understand, but the kids, with the disabilities, for certain, and it's a wide variety. So I think it's a good group to tap into. I can connect you with them.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So we heard the comments earlier on the parks, and one thing we heard specifically the Stevens Meadows, and then you had the picture in the gravel. Now we kept hearing this, earlier. There's gravel's great, gravel's okay, ADA, no issues with gravel, and is that true?
There's all kinds of gravel, and if it's not compacted tightly to create a firm surface, then it won't qualify. So there's crushed gravel, there's crushed granite. Sometimes those surfaces can be, again, if they're very tightly packed, sometimes they can meet ADA, but you saw in that picture, that was pretty open graded, very rough, that would not meet ADA.
I saw in the report, we didn't really look at Stevens Meadows because it says we don't provide any public facilities there, so is it not applicable, or it said in the...
Well, I'm sorry, what was that question again?
Well,
I think the issue there is that we were planning to do some improvements out there, but with the charter changes, we couldn't make those improvements. And had we been allowed to, we could have made them more ADA accessible.
I see, but it's not an issue with our compliance with ADA is not an issue with Stevens Meadows, or it is?
I'd have to look it up.
Answer that.
That's a lawyer question.
That's so. The ADA. If we were to have done those improvements, they would have to be ADA compliant. But the fact that right now there are no improvements, so there's nothing to. And it's a natural space, so there's.
But that parking lot. The commenter referred to and then we saw in the picture.
It's actually not a parking lot. It's just a dead end street. Right. So
the end of the street.
Oh, I see. But if we wanted to, we could at least make the gravel more compacted or whatever
That's outside of the legal.
Yeah, I see.
Well, it might not be outside of the legal. I think we would have.
If we did make improvements, then they would.
Yeah.
Then that's when the ADA comes.
I actually do think that the Stevens Meadow is a conundrum for us, because I think we may not want to make additional improvements out. We don't want to telegraph that it is ADA accessible when it's not.
Right.
And if you actually invest money out there, you'll need to do it in a way that's ADA compliant, is what I hear the city attorney saying. So I'm not sure we can make that existing situation ADA compliant.
Yeah, it's a well, as we all know, that's a real bummer of a situation. Okay. Well, I don't want to hog all the questions, so Councilor Wendland.
So if you do find an ADA issue, let's just say at Stevenson Park or whatever, and under our park regulations, doesn't ADA trump everything? I mean, who cares what local ordinances are? Don't you have an ADA override that, is that?
So you're not required by the ADA to make an improvement, and Kelly can go there. You are required to have a transition planned. So things where you have, like, say, curb cuts, right? You have to have a plan for addressing them. You don't have to address them all at once. And so the thing about Stevens Meadow is you're not actually required to make a public improvement at Stevens Meadow, even by the ADA. You're not required to.
So it's so
The park was built before, before the ADA was in existence. So it's kind of like grandfathered in, but if you touch it, if you go in there, it's going to trigger to bring it up to compliance.
Okay.
And then as you view our parks as a whole, we have, 25 parks or so. As a whole, they're compliant. When you look at it as a whole, that one park.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So I like that statement that we need to, I forgot where it is, but where we need to have a plan and invest when we are able to do that, which means that if, let's just say the list comes in at $100 million or something, and
yes,
that's what I just want, because I think people will see your budget slide, which I think is super important, because you have to follow up action, and action almost always is money related. So explain a little bit then the responsibility, as long as it's on the list and we are putting in some good faith effort to help make budgetary allotments for, if it's $100 million, is there sort of a guideline that we have to do $2 million a year, or is there any sort of forced sort of compliance that we have to be within, or is that, and I'm just saying that I'd love to do everything in 1 year, but we don't have enough money.
No, we're not this is not gonna happen overnight.
Right.
Okay, it's gonna take time. We're trying, the methodology that we're using to make our improvements will be if there was a complaint at that particular location, we're prioritizing the buildings that have like voting and things like that. That's a priority. And we're also,
anything with access to government, and then commercial comes after that.
Yeah.
And if you will, neighborhoods are kind of last. But again, first priority is if somebody calls on some local street and says, there's no ADA ramp here, that becomes a higher priority for us. So we're working on those details, which will explain a little bit more the prioritization and whatnot when we come back in the fall. And we'll have a game plan that's a 15 to 20 year plan recommendation on how to fix all the improvements in the right-of-way and on the publicly owned properties, be they parks, be they this building, be they ACC, the rec, the library, things like that.
So it'll be really important when they adopt the plan, because I think the thing that you're asking, is whatever you pick, it's a 15-year plan or it's a 20-year plan. The measure is going to be, do we actually, this is a plan that cannot sit on the shelf if we don't want to get sued. If we want to get sued, then we'll adopt the plan and then we won't make the investments. But so when you guys talk about the plan in the fall, I think that's where we're going to need your guidance, is because we always have more capital needs than we have dollars, right?
Right.
And so we allocate capital needs based on your policy priorities. And so if you all say this is a 15-year plan, then we're going to budget for it to be a 15-year plan. And if we have a complaint or if someone does challenge us, they're going to look to see, well, you adopted this plan. Are you actually making the investments that you said you're going to make. So that'll be the dialogue that you all need to have in the fall, if I'm making any sense at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Good questions. Councilor Boone?
Yeah, thank you. Really, I'm very proud to be part of Lake Oswego. There's a lot of things to fix here, but you know, every time I hear Erica talk about, you know, our infrastructure as a rural infrastructure in an urban, it makes me think that we're gonna do very well. But we have to put the money in the things. Like, you know, there's no discussion, and that's where I want to call my council colleagues to prioritize this thing, you know, in the next budget or next, you know, to fund this department to do the right thing. And not only it's the right thing because we talk about access, but also it's our interest because people can sue. With my cane, I'm gonna try to look that manhole over there and 100 million, you know, no. Yeah, I'm just saying we should, so legally but also it's humanly and, you know, in a progressive way, a city like Lake Oswego should not continue to be like that. You know, on my Lakeview area, it's a disaster. We should, you know, even people who have no disabilities cannot walk in those streets. So we should think. I'm very proud when I saw the ASL doing things. It's like it makes your heart very happy that look at what we're doing for our citizens. And, you know, I didn't even know we had those devices.
Assisted listening devices?
Yeah, so thank you for your work. I think, you know, the investment of having the EI is important. So I'm proud to be in Lake Oswego. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Raff?
Thanks, Kelly. That was great presentation. You know, I've been pretty quiet here tonight, just dealing with my leg, and but I thought this is be the one moment I'll say one thing. To kind of echo what Masen said, you know, we oftentimes in this council talk about paying for things that affect people outside of Lake Oswego, which I'm not in favor of. I'm in favor of taking care of people in Lake Oswego that live here. You know, when we talk about housing, we should be talking about housing those who are to age in place in Lake Oswego, not necessarily so people can move here. And so when it comes to ADA, this is something that's very important to me, and something, you know, I've said this when we talked about the citizens measure as well, about the unintended consequences. And for me, this is so much bigger than ADA. This is civil rights to me. This is about protecting everybody that lives here so they all can enjoy the experience of Lake Oswego the same way. And so it's so important that we always keep front and center the abilities and rights of people that live here so they can enjoy Lake Oswego, and the secondary and tertiary things we can do will be for those that don't live in Lake Oswego but commute and work, whatever. So I really think that we as a council, we talk about what to do with the money from the demolition fee that we're talking about, what we do with other budgetary surpluses that we can find and where we put them. And I would just, along with Masen, tell my fellow councilors that this should be prioritized. We shouldn't be talking about affordable housing. We should be talking about roads, pathways, ADA access around Lake Oswego, taking care of us, the people that live here first, that have invested in Lake Oswego in their time. And so when we talk about where the demolition fee money should go, let's put it here. Okay, let's make a real effort to make Lake Oswego a better place. So that's what I would say. Thank you. And thank you, Kelly, again for the great presentation.
Councilor Mans?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Bird. Great presentation. I appreciate it. I know in our new ACC, we have a public T-coil for those people wearing hearing aids. Do we have something like that in this building as well?
Public T-coil?
Yeah, and
sure
a mic, if you're wearing a hearing aid,
that's like the assisted listening devices?
I guess
yes,
so, yeah.
We have those here.
Okay, in this building as well.
For this room.
For this room.
I'm
This
sorry,
room is
not the whole
looped.
building.
Yeah.
But this room is, okay. I just wanted to clarify, that's super cool, super cool.
It is, yeah.
Well, thank you for all you're doing and identifying the thousands of things that we have yet to do. And I'm so excited that there'll be a plan, because I'm sure out of that, a lot of the things that we've had to do in engineering and in construction of roads and pathways will come to the fore too. Thank you.
Councilor Burdick.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work. You know, I think it's not just for people with disabilities today, but you never know when something's going to happen and you might be in that position. So I think this is a really important issue. And I was just curious, have you been working with Parks and Rec and just the new Aquatics and Recreation Center to help ensure that we're thinking ahead of things and making sure that that is, you know, again, ready to go and, you know, fully meeting ADA, and if we need to get any specific services in there or technology. So if you haven't, please, I think that's really important. If we can get involved at the front end of projects, the better off. And I know, Erica, you've done a great job in helping when we redo streets and so forth. But if we can do that with all of our buildings too.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we just are in the process of those conversations with Ivan and his team to do a kind of a peer review, if you will, of the plan set to make sure, because ADA is complex. It is not easy. It looks like it should be easy, but it's not. And there's very few tolerances. You know, we're talking small percentages. And so having the expert teams like MIG, they helped do a peer review of this building when it was quite a ways long, and we had to make some adjustments, and that's okay. And we want to catch this a little bit earlier on the Parks project. So we are in the process of looking at that right now. Thank you.
What was I going to ask? Oh, is there become like grant funding kind of available for this kind of work specifically, or?
I'm not personally aware of that. It's maybe something that we can look into once we get the transition plan finished. We could put that down as something I'm personally not familiar with that.
I imagine cities all over, right, are
same thing
working on these plans. Yeah, everywhere. I think too, just to remember that accessibility is about opening up in many ways the city. And I think we heard from some of the in public comment earlier, the intersection between accessibility and housing, and that often as people with disabilities are some of the most marginalized in society and struggle on multiple levels, not just with curb ramps but also with housing. So I think it's important that we just keep in mind that it is about not closing off but opening up the city to as many different folks as possible, making sure we're welcoming in not just our demeanor, but also in all respects, including our physical infrastructure and other barriers that prevent people from thriving in LO, which of course includes housing. Okay, but thank you really so much for the work. Ms. Bry will connect you with that group, the parents. They're great. They would love to
good.
Be. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And we appreciate this report. We'll look forward to in the fall.
Yeah, so in the fall, when Kelly finishes up the transition plan, we'll bring that to you, and we should have a better idea of magnitude of dollars. They'll just be magnitude of dollars.
It is nice though that you were able. I'm very impressed that you were able to get through the first 5 or 6 parts on your list to check off, so we know where we're at. Because I was kind of thinking that you'd be giving us reports for 5 years to tell us, everything. You will, but more progress. I'm so happy that you already have a number of things checked off that this is like the fastest I've ever seen anything happen. That's good. This is great. I think it's wonderful. Now we may fall over our chairs when we see the list, but that's a whole nother,
Yeah, it's much.
That's why Martha's like, right.
It's much like a master plan. Like when we did the wastewater master plan or the water master plan, you end up with a capital list at the end. And from that, we then put it into our capital improvement plan that we all see every 2 years and is part of the budgeting process. We will now be adding this ADA component to it because there's going to be 1,000 ADA ramps that need to be looked at. As a part of that, there'll be sidewalks that need to be fixed, not just installed. We're not talking about that, but just the ones that are out there that need to be fixed. Those will be identified, the parks improvements, ACC, I'm picking on all the other public places, but all of those things will be a part of our capital improvement plan. And different from other infrastructure, we do have more of a federal mandate that you have to get these things improved. So again, that conversation about prioritization will need to occur, but we hope to have that for you, that magnitude list, the actual physical list, and we'll talk about that as we develop the CIP. And then one thing Kelly didn't mention is that every year we're going to have an update. What did we do last year? How much money did we spend? How many ramps did we fix? How many sidewalks? What did we fix for parks? So that we can show those progress reports. So it's a like I said at the beginning, it's a long-term program that we have to consistently be making progress.
And just this include, I know so many of these were kind of programmatic, non-capital, all these other.
Yes, and some of those things have been started to do that too. Kelly's working with the different departments on website changes, providing a customer, what is it called? Forgotten the form. No, the form.
Oh,
yeah, the customer service request.
Yeah, folks on on our website, I wasn't able to show it all, but we have a ADA portal. So the community can, if they have a grievance, they can fill it out. They can request an accommodation and communicate with us and contact me. And people I've already had meetings with people in the community who want to express some of their concerns. So
Welcome to Lake Oswego.
I'll be super busy, but that's good though.
But tracking all of that is a part of what we need to do, keep track of it, make progress on it, respond to it, report on it.
That's great. Wonderful. Bravo. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
For your time.
Thank you.
Well, now we have information from council. I'll just announce that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Obviously, critical topic, especially right now, especially with young people. And there's several ways to get involved. Clackamas County has many ongoing events all month long, including actually tomorrow, if you're not busy, a rally. May 18th, that is tomorrow, right? Yes. And then a walk on May 22nd. The Clackamas County website has a lot more information. And then to update you all on what's going on in the at the regional table, we heard the coalition. We participated in this research justice study. Maybe you all remember with the oh, didn't? Yeah, we did. Yeah. With the Coalition of Communities of Color. So they came to C4 earlier this month and just reported on the work that they are doing to kind of gather data on all sorts of different communities, BIPOC communities, houseless communities, some data was hard to, anyway. They're connecting with people all throughout communities in Clackamas County, working on, and they've done this work. They did a 2018 research justice project in Washington County, which just kind of helps. So the county's leading this effort and able to provide basically just an understanding. I mean, kind of a baseline. Honestly, it's a little heady, to kind of wrap around exactly what, because it's more, I don't know how to say it eloquently, but it's just a data. It's trying to get a baseline, and it's very involved. So they've been working at it for a year plus, and so they're going to have information on that. But it's kind of how government, how communities can interact with one another. What are barriers? What are opportunities? All that kind of thing. Communities from Clackamas County. During that meeting, all gave kind of updates on their own DEI efforts, and it's good to see the progress that many communities are making. I have to say, Lake Oswego, almost embarrassing how good we were. I felt bad. I left stuff out just because I didn't want to make them feel, that bad. Poor Westland. And then at MPAC, and then we've had these communications from. City Manager Bennett as well, but we talked about the DLCD, climate-friendly, equitable communities. We had that come in. There's also our neighbors in Tigard. They've applied for a mid-cycle review, the first mid-cycle review, to bring in, a chunk of land to do a whole, housing for needed housing. And oddly enough, so, the legislature created this process for mid-cycle review because they were thinking, well, we need housing. And sometimes you can't wait, for the on-cycle review. But they have found that going through the process and how they determine, well, is there enough land for housing, that there's already enough land for housing, even though we all know there's not enough housing. So so they're saying basically fails under the mid-cycle review. So now they're looking at bringing it in under a land swap. So they would move, I think it's 500 acres. So they'd move 500 acres out of the UGB to bring this 500 acres into the UGB, and but the whole process honestly seems a little crazy, since we're obviously so short of housing. But, it's all the lots that, will never be built on, and they could be, but maybe in 100 years, so anyway, update. So, and then that's, and then we're also, Clackamas has been having discussions on shelter housing. They're very interested, the whole C4 group and the Metro subcommittee. And this is also a conversation taking place at MPAC, so very similar conversations just around shelter, understanding the types of shelter that are needed and what kind of the best locations for those, and then what are some of the barriers to locating to locating shelters. Obviously, we see issues around siting shelters every day in the news, and so the regional table is trying to kind of be more deliberate, learn from each other, and figure out what we can do to provide the kind of these needed transitional housing opportunities for people that we're very short on. And we had the data here from Clackamas, and we hardly have any. There's a shelter in Oregon City, and it's the only shelter. So then Oregon City, of course, feels like, well, just the same way we would feel. They're like, why do we have because it's people from other jurisdictions get brought into Oregon City, and no one would like that. So it's just clear that it needs to be more, spread out and address a wider multitude of needs too, because I think that's just a men's shelter too, maybe. So obviously that's a problem. So it doesn't address half the population. So, okay, that's all I have. Councilor Wynn. Isn't that uplifting?
Very uplifting.
What a way to end the meeting.
Don't go to those meetings. No, just downers.
Just a fun reminder, it is, this month also is AAPI NH month as well, so we're having AAP.
NH, Native Hawaiian.
Native Hawaiian. I'm learning too. But we're having an event on Sunday, that AAPI NH event with lion dancers and singing performances, and there will be a martial arts demonstration as well, and then there'll be some, I think, some different types of arts and crafts things. So a great event, starts at 12, I should go until 2:30, I believe, so. It's at Millennium Park Plaza, yeah. Yeah.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah, so we had a great turnout last year, and, yeah.
Huge.
Yeah, I've confirmed they are bringing the dragons this year too. They had last year these had the lions, but you guys haven't seen the dragons. The dragons are fantastic.
Do they eat a different vegetable?
They eat green, so. I don't think so. I don't think we.
Vendors.
That's probably for next year. I think they were trying to organize it this year, but yeah.
Kevin.
Would have been nice.
Planning ahead.
Councilor.
I just wanted to do a shout out to the library because they had a great LO reads. I think just about every event was extremely successful, including the mayor's bike ride. So thank you for that. But they just had, lots of people attending all their events. I won't go into all the details, but it was a huge success. So I just wanted to do a shout out to the library for another job well done.
Great, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, Councilor Mans.
In the vein of giving shout outs, I wanted to give a shout out to the Planning Commission for all the work that they did on middle housing, which we saw a great accumulation here today presented by Eric. So thank you to the Planning Commission.
Great.
Yeah, shout out to the Youth Leadership Council. Great group of, we visited the Boone's Ferry project last Monday. It was wonderful. And also, did I tell you about the fire marshal when we went to the fire stations and have even on Instagram posts, putting out fires. And so great group of kids. I'm very proud of them. And, great coaches. We have Jamie and Charity. They're like amazing with those kids. They do really good stuff. So, we have a good group of kids. So no worries about the future in Lake Oswego. So,
City Manager Bennett.
I just have one thing, which is since you already have a date for your special meeting, which is next Tuesday, tomorrow Carrie will be giving you a call, or you can email her to tell us whether you'd rather start at 3. Well, that's when the executive session is scheduled, but we can move that, whether you'd rather start at 3 or rather start at 4. If you start at 4, we'll do the exec session first, and then we'll do the work session at 5:30. If you start at 3, we'll do the work session at 3, do the exec session at 4:30. You should plan for 3.
I think we needed to do it at 4, though, right?
Had it at 4, I don't know, it's just.
4 is better.
Can you do 4? We'll just start it at 4.
Yeah.
And then I'm concerned about trying to do the study sessions after the exec session. I think you'll want to end the meeting with the exec session. That could go longer. Okay, the mayor and I will work it out. We'll leave it at 4, and then Jason and I will figure out what to do with about the.
Something else on the agenda is anything super important?
June 7th, I think the mayor's out of town that day, so. I'm not arguing with you. It's the mayor gets to set the agenda. So if he's asked for items to be scheduled and he's present, then.
That's fine. I just did.
Yeah.
Those 2 points were not huge.
I think we'll get through them, no problem.
Okay.
In that vein, yes.
Okay, this is helpful. Thank you. Okay, we'll do it at 4 o'clock. But we also have to figure out what time we're going to have TV, because we wouldn't have had TV for just the exec session. So we'll figure it out, but it's helpful to know.
One of them is time sensitive, because we need to give feedback on, we're trying to get we need to have the hearing at the end of June, so we need, on the housing thing, so we kind of need that to be approved.
Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you all. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you all. We are adjourned.